is September the 8th, and on behalf of Selco, I welcome you all to the third FeedTechnoVision event. My name is Donatello Pires, and I'm your moderator for today. Glad that you are here. We have prepared a lovely program for you, as we have world-renowned experts and speakers on feed processing and efficiency for the table discussion and how the industry will respond and is expected to adapt to the current crisis. The challenge is highlighting potential short-term solutions to cope with high input costs for feed manufacturers while providing safe and at the same time high-quality feed in order, of course, of feeding the future. With me here is Pedro Carmona. He is Category Director of Feed Safety and Quality at Selco Feed Additives. Been working in the feed additive industry for the past 17 years, so he knows something about it, and his experience comes from having active roles in management, technical support, sales, R&D in United States and across EMEA, and he's here with us. Welcome.
Well, good morning, Donatello.
Let us start with the important question, why this event today?
Well, it's a very good question, Donatello. We have the third session of the FeedTechnoVision coming live today. Very excited to be here. And I think it's a very particular need for this sort of discussion as we see today. You see inflation, particularly food inflation,
yes,
trends to reach double-digit growth in the next couple of months, triggered by post-pandemic effects, supply chain disruptions, and also the recent energy crisis driven by the geopolitical tension. So it's very important that we have a space to discuss ideas. Where can we help and support the feed industry moving forward?
Yes, so I guess it is important that we are discussing this. You, of course, invited, like I previously mentioned, renowned speakers for the table discussion, but also to address. We also have some knowledge sharing ahead. What do you think is important that we discuss here at the table?
Yeah, so the feed industry is particular risk exposed to the current scenario. As you see, costs like energy and raw materials would make up around 90% of the operational costs. So the main take-home messages that we'll have and key deliverables, one of them is how to adapt to the raw material procurement positions and quality control schemes to safeguard availability and sustain high-quality feed standards. The second biggest important part is how to understand the impact of the use of the available raw materials on feed processing and how can we adapt for efficiency on energy use and cost reduction. So those are the very key points that we got from around the world in terms of the key messages, but also we want to make it very practical so that we can utilize them very, I would say, in the short term, mid-term, to overcome the current situation that we're living on.
And what needs to happen? I mean, when at the end, because I will ask you, of course, Pedro, when are you satisfied with today's event?
I would say the most critical part is that we have a good interaction with the participants all over the world. We have a large participation of hundreds of people now that are watching live. We really want to see that participation, but also from the speakers that will be here, a panel of speakers, that we see critical mass being discussed on key objectives, key strategies to try to reduce the current situation we are on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pedro. You will be also one of our panelists at the end of the session today. And then we'll come back to you, of course, with the most important conclusions that you have after we have all the discussions. And ladies and gentlemen, dear attendees, it's good to have you here. And like Pedro previously mentioned, we would like you to be part of this show. And for this, we work with Mentimeter. And this means that with the Mentimeter system, we would like you to connect, and we will broadcast it right now. And if you see, there are two easy ways to connect to the Mentimeter system. The first is that we have the QR code, and secondly, you can simply go to menti.com, enter the code 4284348, and then you will be sliding into the system. So we will have a QR code for you briefly coming up right now, and that is the way that you can connect with your smartphone wherever you are, at the venue, in your home offices, in the office, and try to connect with the system, either with your smartphone going into the QR code, and otherwise, of course, just simply go to your browser, digit menti.com, and then go to the code, and that is the unique event code for today, 42843448. And of course, I will give you the opportunity to connect with us, because that is the way that you can participate at the table discussion, but also raise questions during the presentations of our speakers. And afterwards, then we can right away start with the Q&A session. I see that people are coming in right now. In the first phase, of course, you can't do a lot besides giving your like or your love, depending a little bit on the mood this morning. More likes than love for now. And I will keep the QR code for a couple of seconds on. That's the easiest way to slide into the system and to participate for the table discussions, to raise questions for the speakers, of course. And we might have some questions prepared for you as well, just to get into the system. So for now, I will go to the first question, where you can simply go to menti.com and use the code in your browser 42843448, and that is broadcasted above in the screen. So where are you joining us from? Please digit the cities where you are, or the countries. Of course, we are broadcasting here from the Netherlands in Europe, but I know that there are people from all over the world watching now. Might be a little bit more eastwards, Pedro, besides, I mean, just because otherwise people have to participate in the middle of the night. But it is recorded, so everybody subsequently will have the opportunity to watch. I will particularly address all the participants from the Victim Asia event in Bangkok, because we know that you are there. So welcome. It's good to have you here. And I think I see Bangkok, I see Thailand. That is the biggest word, and that means that the most of the attendees come from that specific country. We see Taiwan, we see Singapore, we see Amsterdam, we see Italy, we see France, South Africa, the victim, they said it, Lithuania, Norway, what do we have? Catalonia, Indonesia, Drunen, big city, Barcelona, India, and all other Asia. A lot of cities and countries have been stated, and right now a lot of people are coming in. I will give you briefly the opportunity again for the QR code if you're just logging in right now. We're in the introduction of the third, I have to say, FeedTechnoVision event, and this is the way to participate. So if you just scan the QR code with your smartphone, that is the opportunity for you to join us. Okay, the next question is a more serious one, of course. Which global crisis does affect your daily job the most? And it's a multiple choice question, so you can choose upon trade disputes, climate change, staff shortage, energy prices, the war in Ukraine, or the COVID-19 pandemic. That is, of course, depending on where you are in the world, still influencing your daily jobs. And that's also the first answer was the COVID-19 pandemic. The second one is the war in Ukraine. Which global crisis does affect your daily jobs the most? Please give us your answers. And right now we see that people are doing that. Pedro, what do you think is, I mean, if you had to pick one, because I think they're all very effective, unfortunately, on the daily jobs in the sector. If you had to speak for your responsibility?
Yeah, I would say this is really where driving crisis, but all these factors are coming in at the same time. And I think that's a real big challenge that we're facing today, where they basically are joining together.
The combination, actually.
The combination of it. So I would think that, of course, the post-pandemic is still there. The supply chain disruptions are still a reflection of it. But I think what is really key at the moment is indeed the energy crisis that we see around the world. And obviously, driven by the geopolitical tension that we have in Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah. What we see right now, and we can see it also at the screens, the most people, 29%, almost 30% say the war in Ukraine, 27% say, of course, energy prices and rising. Right now it's ex equo, so I think those two things are very much connected also. A quarter of the people, 24%, say the COVID-19 pandemic, so that is not that's not vanished. And then we have trade disputes, 8%, climate change, 8%, and 5% staff shortage, which in some parts of the world is a big problem, but if we just go to the more and the bigger problems, we see that 28%, the war in Ukraine and the energy prices. Final question for you. What do you hope to get out of this event? So give us that as the final question, just before we go to the first speaker of the FeedTechnoVision event, broadcasted here live from the Netherlands. What do you hope to get out of this event? Please give us your input, because to get inspired, someone says, on how to deal with current market situations. Another person says simply hope, which is important, of course. And people are digiting right now. What do you hope to get out of this event? I, of course, first asked it to Pedro. Another person says safe feedcasts, insights, inspiration, decreasing ingredient costs, new angles or views on the biggest challenges. Somebody else says we need peace. If I could do something about that, of course, from this position, I would do. But I fully agree. I can say that. Decreasing ingredient costs, more insights, what's on the mind of the whole feed chain, knowledge and suggestions to share with customers, to get knowledge about the latest developments in the world, new ideas, to be enlightened, to get updated, to reduce feed production costs, to increase energy prices, feeding betterment, which can profit by farming, an update from the globe, and let me conclude saying with to solution to feed technology and to update knowledge and to save feed costs. Well, please continue giving the answers, of course, because we want to know. But let me go to introduce the first speaker of today. That is Robert van der Bremer. He is Procurement Director, Macro Ingredients at Nutrico. Prior to this appointment, he was a Business Development Manager for Shrimp Feed at the Skretting Global Headquarters in Stavanger, that is in Norway, and a Corporate Development Manager at Nutrico Headquarters in Amersfoort, the Netherlands. He's going to tell us more on raw material quality and the availability and its impact on the input costs. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the opportunity to raise also your questions, and after his 15-minute presentation, he will sit here at the table to first answer your questions, and then hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion. But first, Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Donatello, and welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm going to talk to you about raw materials. And obviously, over the last, let's say 30 months, we have seen massive turbulence due to COVID. We've really been at unprecedented times. And every time after a few months, when we thought we were seeing the end of all this, we witnessed new distress, new price increases, new logistics issues. And when we thought around COVID all was sort of really behind us, there came the war in Ukraine and the energy crisis that we're now into. Progressing in the background of all that is the heating of our planet, and IPCC scientists saying that it's now or never to limit global warming, urging for a rapid, deep and immediate cut in carbon dioxide emissions. I have been in sourcing for almost 3 years now. So basically, personally, I don't know any better. I don't know what normal is, what normal was, nor what normal will be. So somebody asked for hope to get from this presentation. I find it difficult because we are in unprecedented times with challenges in raw materials, in logistics and in climate change. And sourcing feed ingredients will not get easier going forward. So my presentation today will therefore be about sourcing and about two key elements of that. One, to have ingredients available so you can keep your plant running at the right price and at the right time and at the right place. But also to have high quality ingredients, to have functional, to do what they need to do, to be able to deliver ingredients to your customers that do what they're supposed to do. So starting off on the available. There's basically three things that I think are key issues to discuss. What happened in the last 30 months. One, obviously COVID. Two, the energy shock. And three, climate change. So starting off with COVID. COVID, what happened? Well, first of all, COVID, when it started, was expected to slow down the global economy. And actually the opposite happened. At the same time, shipping crew, transport people saw high illness rates, frequent quarantine cases, and also many of them found more family-friendly jobs. So what you notice is that with the global economy growing, we saw a growing need for logistics and a smaller pool of people to get the actual work done. Next to that, COVID created a global imbalance. It takes a world to feed a world. By some estimates, 80%, so 80% of the global population live in countries which are net importers of food. On top of that, farmers, when they saw prices going up, are holding on to their inventory because they see prices increase and see expectations to make more money. So all of that created quite some volatility in the vegetable markets. But then there was also bird flu raging in Europe and the Americas, limiting the availability of land animal protein. Marine ingredient markets are as unpredictable as ever. And on top of that, we have novel ingredients that are super promising, but simply don't have the skill yet to really provide a counterbalance. So next to COVID, we had the energy shock. So obviously you've seen in the last 6 months a major spike in ingredient or in energy prices. And that is still continuing to today. And obviously the war added a huge amount of volatility and uncertainty to the energy market. There's a general shortage. And today in Europe, price of energy is sometimes 5 to 15 times more than what it used to be. So this is a challenge for the feed industry, especially because it's hitting our value chain in several ways. First of all, with the fertilizer to grow the crops, but also for the machinery to plant, harvest, process the crops. Obviously, all the transport that's involved in it. So it's an increasing energy price hits the feed industry and our value chain several times. Finally, there's climate change. And I think the climate change impact on raw material availability and quality is enormous. The planet is heating up and the world is starting to see the consequences of that. There's floods in Europe, Canada, and recently in Pakistan. Extreme temperatures and droughts from France to the Middle East, to India, to the US Midwest, all in levels that we haven't seen worldwide in at least 2 decades. So all these things are damaging prospects for global commodity production. So what is the name of the game then? Well, unfortunately, that name is uncertainty. So what do we see happening? Well, first of all, the economy. Inflation has been mentioned already. Global estimates, the average would be around 7.5% this year. But this is an average. We see also in the developed world inflation rates of double digits. This is something that is, for many of us, never seen before. So what is happening with that inflation? How will that impact our value chain? If you can keep on pushing prices into the value chain, yeah, you are sort of out of problems. But how long can you keep doing that? And at some point, somebody, and that somebody is most likely me and you, when you're in the supermarket buying your groceries, needs to pay for it. And what will happen if people start spending differently or less or not at all? And how will that then feed back to us and the global feed demand? So inflation is a terribly uncertain thing where we haven't, we're starting to see what is going to happen there. Uncertainty, obviously, also on the geopolitics front. Ukraine and Russia, clear, war is still ongoing. When, where will that end? Nobody knows. How will it end? Nobody knows. What will then be the position of Ukraine and Russia, big commodity producers? We don't know. There's China and the United States having, well, to say it politely, conversations about Taiwan. What's going to happen there? If anything happens, it will be sudden, it will be impactful, and yeah, we will need to deal with the consequences. Finally, the weather. I spoke about the climate already, but when you look at the weather, this is the first time since 2000 that we get 3 La Niñas in a row, usually followed by an El Niño, which means droughts in one place and lots of rain in the other, and then changing. So obviously, big impact on commodity production, and again, uncertainty. And then I haven't mentioned the export bans. Some countries saying, well, if I can't have your palm oil, well, then you can't have my corn. They tend to have a sort of rollover effect. Logistics issues, well, we all know about that. One tanker stuck in the Suez Canal and the whole world is in turbulence. On top of that, there's currency. We all saw the strengthening of the dollar. So yeah, if prices increase, or decrease, do we really all benefit from that? So the big question is, and also at the start we just saw, okay, so what do we want from this session? We want some ideas about the prices. Where are they going? Yeah, it's pretty hard to say. Probably if I would know the answer to that question, I would not be standing here giving this presentation to you today. So where are markets moving? These are 4 charts from a recent report from the Rabobank, a big global agricultural bank. And yes, I think the big impact of the war in Ukraine has now faded out of the markets, which means we are at pre-war levels. But that doesn't mean we are at pre-COVID levels. We are still at incredibly high prices. Then going forward, you see straight lines here. And also our expectation right now would be a more or less stable market. But then again, given all the uncertainty mentioned before, yeah, I think we all understand that this will not be the reality. So what will happen? Really, really difficult to say. And again, with the strengthening of the dollar, will all really benefit from a decrease? That depends per market. So yeah, lots happening. On the wheat, clearly Russia had a good harvest this year. There's a Ukraine grain deal, but to be honest, there's not so much volume moving out there. And you can also argue the appetite for the global appetite for Russian raw materials. On the corn, I heard beginning of this week big floods in the big corn regions in China, and also globally, corn demand seems to be lower than last year, which is also never seen before. So lots of uncertainty. On the soy, rains are good in the US, seems to be coming up a good harvest there. But then again, big question, what is China going to do? Will they come back to the buying behavior they noticed last year, or will they not? Yeah, and then on the palm, quite big inventories in Malaysia, Indonesia, but also there the big question, what is China going to do? So looking at markets, where are they moving? I would give it my 5 cents to say it's relatively stable going forward, but I can never be certain about this. And that's about the availability part. If we then move to the functional part, having the ingredients at the right quality and also with the lowest impact, there's another big challenge. Because when you look at quality, obviously there's always raw material to buy, but you need to make sure that you deliver on nutritional, on safety, on compliance, standards that you set and that you set to your suppliers. So in these tough times, will you be able to do so? Is that raw material still available, and can you keep those quality standards? Second, you need to be also flexible with setting specifications. There are some regulatory things that you really must live up to. There are some others that over time you've set yourself as sort of standards, but when times get tough, you might need to relook at those and see what is really needed of that. And can we be flexible to accommodate some buying somewhere in this world? Finally, supply chain control as the third one. So where are ingredients coming from? Where have they been? Are you getting what you ordered? Can you ensure traceability? Do you know the actual origin? You have a responsibility towards your customers to deliver and to know what and where the product, what is going into the diets of your customers. So having that control and being able to act when things are not in order, when they're not how you want that to be, is really important. And then finally, I think in these times of high volatility, and you obviously sometimes are looking at new suppliers, some people that have options that you have never seen before. And there, I would argue that you need to be careful. Because when times get tough, you get new people entering the market that think they can benefit from that circumstances. So make sure, especially with new suppliers and new ingredients, to really check the quality, check what you're getting. And if things seem too good to be true, they usually are. So be careful. Then the second part is on, there we go. Yes, it's about sustainability. So we had the quality, this is about sustainability. The chart on the left that you see is our greenhouse gas emissions and what they would do if we would not do anything. And it's clearly good that with current policies we are, well, you can say it, stabilizing where we are today. The challenge is here that while on the raw materials and the price increases there, we have a process called inflation where at some point all of us, everything adjusts to a new, usually higher price level. Unfortunately, with the greenhouse gas emissions, that's not possible. We don't need to get to a new equilibrium, but we need to get to an actual reduction. If we want to take control of the climate and the climate change, we need to go to a 2 degree or 1.5 degree pathway. So while with the raw material prices, we find a new equilibrium, on the sustainability side, we actually need to reduce. We need to find a new balance, and it's about really turning the tide and doing more, because we need to grow more crops, produce more feed with a whole lot less. It's a big challenge. So what to do? And I think, to be honest, the name of the game is creating flexibility. Strong value chain relationships is one part of that, with customers to know what their demand is and to be fully up to date on that, to know that you're buying enough but also not too much. With your suppliers, to know what they have, what their challenges are, how you can help them, how they can help you. With banks, with prices increasing, lead times increasing, you need more working capital to run your business. So strong relationships with all those stakeholders will keep you flexible. Transparency on logistics, on where raw materials come from. If there are delays, you need to know about them really soon so you can adapt and make changes. Very clear on the origins as well. So where is stuff coming from? Can we use that? Transparency, very important to create the flexibility. Local regional sourcing, often mentioned, of course, in these times. Well, why don't we buy next door? Well, you don't just move 100,000 tons of grain production to another region. It doesn't go that fast. So if it's not there, it's not there. But then again, what is there? Look for local opportunities and benefit from that. And one, obviously, could be actual production. But have you looked into storage? Maybe it makes sense for you to store some additional ingredients relatively close to you to keep that flexibility. Finally, it's about innovation. So what do your animals and fish, the ones you feed, what do they really need? What's the real nutritional need? Because no chicken, no salmon, no cow eats corn. They eat protein and they eat fat. So know what ingredients, nutritional requirements the animal has, and based on that, look at what certain ingredients can bring and about the alternatives that you have to bring those nutrients to your customers. So to close off, what is the new normal? Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have the answer there yet. I think crises will keep coming, so we need to keep dealing with them and stay focused on the long-term challenges. We've had COVID. We are getting into a recession. Climate change is already happening, but is really looming over us. So creating flexibility is the name of the game. So thank you very much. I look forward to the panel discussion and your questions. And it was an honor to be here presenting to you today.
So thank you, Robert. And let us, before we start the discussion here at the table, let's dive quickly into some questions that people have been asking during your presentation. And actually, sometimes I mean, it was about volatility, about uncertainty, unprecedented times. It was like one of the leaders of the world was speaking. What are the views on the nearby future is something that I would like to ask here at the table. Some questions that have been raised during your presentation. Do you think that decreasing quality standards will really help availability in the EU, or other factors should be in touch, and which ones?
Well, if it really increases, I don't know. I do think that right now, given the situation we're in, I think we need to look at every opportunity we have to get what we need. And I think in that, there is no sacred house, to say it like that. So I think, to be honest, anything should be discussed.
Okay.
And also on the quality side, then I think we need to be open to be able to discuss anything, and with that, give opportunities for
Okay. And let me open it up just shortly for the rest of. Do you agree with that? No.
Well, for me, it's a very interesting question, of course. Can we accept decreasing quality standards? And the question is what do we mean with quality? So in some ways, we cannot cut corners. Sometimes you feel then you are in a catch-22, because, we have to keep up the quality and we have to comply to all the regulations. And, we don't have any product to buy, so then there is nothing. So that is really the balancing act that we are in. And in that respect, for me, it all starts with what are the real non-negotiables, and the regulatory standards, they are non-negotiables. And, there is a wishful thinking, can we all have the same regulation worldwide? It would make life so much easier.
Yeah, well,
but fact is, it's not. So if we have to change our supply chain and buy from a supplier in Mexico, which was before in Europe, then this supplier in Mexico has to understand the European regulation and comply to it. So that's certainly something we need to consider in our purchasing.
Yes, I already opened it up to the Geke Naadgeboren Stoffels, to introduce also the other panelists, of course. She's a Global Quality Director at Trouw Nutrition, responsible for design and execution of the policy and the strategy regarding feed to food quality and safety, of course. And Ernst Neff, former director and specialist teacher at the Swiss Institute of Feed Technology, SFT. You started it in 1993 after having worked for many years in the feed and flour mills installation. After 2015, now a consultant in feed milling, and you're advising professionals in the feed industry on how to improve their feed milling process. What do you think? I mean, there might be no holy houses. There might not be. Maybe we have to consider everything.
Finally, I definitely agree to what Robert says, but we have to look also at two kinds of qualities. When we talk about quality increase or quality demands, we have to look at the qualities in nutritional points.
The nutritional quality?
Let's say
yes.
Chemical properties.
Yes.
And we have to look at the qualities in physical view. So that means quality of pellets, quality of the feed, and as such, homogeneity, and so on. This is maybe what will be a challenge in the future with different raw materials.
Yes. Another question.
Already.
It looks like globalization is facing a crisis. Somebody says, how to face that, considering our dependency to Chinese manufacturing industry for additives?
Yeah, good question.
Yes.
No, I think one thing I learned in procurement, you should never be dependent on one supplier. And that could be one company, but it could also be one country or region. So with that, I think you want to spread your risk. And that's what we want to do, create that flexibility. Then again, if for certain additives, the only production is in China, I mean, then that is what it is. You don't just move that. This is a challenge, making sure we keep in good relationships.
Yes.
With those suppliers to ensure you keep getting delivered.
Yeah, and the first part of your answer is that it's never good to be fully dependent on one region.
No.
Another question about that is, do you see increasing reliance on local raw materials, for example, region-specific co-products and waste streams?
Absolutely. I think, but this is, I would always say, especially when you look at macro ingredients, if you can buy them with your neighbor, why would you go to the other end of the world to get it? Given logistics, given supply chain risks, I would always first look around quite next to you.
Yes.
What is there available, and how can I use this?
Another specific question, and then I will open up for everybody. The corn and soy price graphs were the same in your presentation, and somebody asked which one is correct.
I don't have them by heart right now, but I can correct this after the presentation.
Yeah.
But I think.
But which one? We can put it on. I think.
But I can.
You can. All right.
I think they were both similar, but I need to. I can check. But
okay. The subsequent, the right ones will be placed online. But on the other hand, I mean, to elaborate a little bit more about those graphs, they weren't. I mean, I saw stabilizing or decreasing. Am I right? On almost all. I mean, on soy.
Yeah, you would say so.
Yes,
you would say so.
Yes, you're very
Yeah, because looking at a couple things, examples of logistics, I think normally the global logistics reliability of container ships is around 80-90%. We're now at 40. That was at 30, 25, something like that. So yes, we are improving. And with further improving should come cost reduction. So yes, those lines should be trending down. But yeah, I guess should be is saying it all already.
Yes. Is it wishful thinking, or do we think that, I mean, the problem is, of course, that nobody knows, but...
it's the famous uncertainty, huh?
It's the uncertainty, and of course, what are your views on the nearby future if you look into the markets, Ernst and Geke?
I don't think anyone, not any expert, is able to tell what's going to happen. So it depends very much how long the war is going to keep going. Prices might go up further.
That's a very important...
Yes, yes. And the other thing will be the crisis in between China, US,
trade disputes,
and Taiwan. If their conflict is going to be happen, prices will most probably explode again.
Yeah, so that is what markets are actually watching. Yes, so that's the main uncertainty. There are the graphs, Robert.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
Well, it says corn, so the soy one is not correct. I'll correct that for the...
The soy one is not correct, the corn one is?
Yeah.
Okay. And could you say so? I mean, but it is not, I mean...
No, I think you see a similar development for the soy.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Obviously at different levels, but yeah.
Yeah, what I wanted to add is that I think it's very important to prepare for the worst, and maybe that sounds very negative.
Yes,
but I also think that creates then thinking out of the box and thinking in opportunities. So rather thinking in, oh, I wish it's going to stop. I wish we are going to have peace, but it's not. This is where we are in today, and we better face it.
It's a realistic view.
And act upon it,
yes,
rather than hoping that it will go away. But because it's not going away.
Yes.
So also from a quality perspective, what we are doing, we are enabling the business and we are supporting the business to have a much as big supplier base as we can have, to have all the information available globally so that we can apply that globally. And so that's what we need to do.
Yes.
So be flexible and face the challenges we have.
Embrace for impact. If I
yeah.
Yes, because the uncertainty, of course, we would like, and I remember when we had the financial crisis, the global financial crisis, on a daily basis, we were asking experts on all television stations, what do you think? And of course, obviously, for a couple of months and years, they couldn't predict it because, and we are, and for COVID, actually the same. And now we are in the perfect storm of different crises. We already elaborated with Pedro on that, and you say nobody, but we have to act. So that's actually the question that I also raised for the attendees. How are you adapting your procurement positions right now? And of course, I think that the attendees hope to hear something from you. Flexibility is something. Somebody says balance quality standards and the number of suppliers, not to rely on a single supplier or country or region. That's the flexibility. Is that important?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned that. I think flexibility is one part. I think the other part is real planning. So as mentioned, I think knowing from your suppliers what do you have available, what can you get with us in a certain time frame, but also to your customers, because we tend to, I think previously customer demand was relatively, well, I wouldn't say stable, but at least it was sort of stable and growing and etc. And we never saw a major decline. I think we could start seeing that now. So staying in touch for the planning side, not just with your suppliers to know what they have and what they can deliver to you, but also to your customers to really know what you need. If you buy a certain ingredient now, thinking it's going to take you until January to use that, and then you price it in, but then it takes you to April, yeah, that could mean quite a impact on margins in your business. So adapting your procurement positions, really closely look at both the supply side, but really also the demand side.
Also the demand side. Ernst?
I believe the pandemic and the crisis that happens right now has shown very typically how depending we are in many cases. And I believe also in the feed milling industry we have to go more local again.
More local.
To find
do you think it's feasible to do...
To a certain extent.
To a certain extent? To a certain
extent. What are the problems? I'm thinking about agro-industrial byproducts, for instance. Could be a solution. Happened already, I remember in my good age, I remember about 25 years ago. We had similar things where grains, cereals were very expensive. So it has been replaced by agro-industrial products and oil.
So that's something that we could do, actually, resourcing it back to what do you believe in that, Robert?
Absolutely.
Yes?
I think in general, but also pre-COVID, we should have tried those things and looked at that.
Yes.
I mean, again, if you can get it from your neighbor, then you should probably do so.
Yes.
So, but perhaps
But the global movement wasn't like that. The global movement was actually to look upon, can we cost effectively do it in, I won't mention any names, but everybody knows where we have looked upon, and now we are depending.
I think we realized during COVID that borders can actually close. And I think before that it was sort of just get it wherever you want.
Yes.
If it's the most cost effective, we just get it. And I think by now we start to realize that the supply chains can break. So we need to have alternatives, be flexible. And indeed, I think also, as Aaron says, look for local opportunities if you have not done so already.
The problem is, although, that I mean, if you don't have it locally right now, if you want to grow crops that you haven't done for 2 decades, now you have to. I mean, you won't do it in a couple of weeks, and not even in a couple of months. It will take some time to do that. So, do we have the time to do those things, Ernst and Geke?
Time is always short. I don't think so. Then now we are in front of winter, so there is no agriculture.
No.
At least not in Europe.
No.
So it will take at least until next year.
Yes.
Yeah, and what I think is also very important is that we protect what we have. So preserve early. So when you have materials, then take care that that is maintained at the right quality, that you or treat it so that it is at the highest quality, or that you store it in a way that you have no moisture getting in, so that what we have, that it is available. And I think to prevent any losses of materials. And the other thing is that I think it's also really important that to realize that from a quality perspective, of course, the fewer suppliers you have, the better it is, because then you can really focus on those and really make them perfect. And now we see that we are, moving in a way that we have more and more suppliers we need to look at, and that is really a challenge, to really do a very proper, good risk assessment, to see where are our biggest risks and what are the suppliers that we really need to look at. Because in the end, the animal deserves, of course, the best feed. And that's what we do it for. We do it for our customers, but in the end we do it for our consumers, and that's the animals.
Yes. But still we have to cope, of course, with some measures, crisis. I will speak a little bit to finalize this table discussion about the sustainability and the recognized drivers. But first, somebody else, and I would like to ask you first, Geke, do you think that the authorities, for example, the EFSA, will be also flexible in a short period of time?
Well, that's on my wish list. That's on my bucket list, and that's going to be very hard, because it's and we, of course, there have been, when the whole war started, then there also were some discussions like, can we negotiate on pesticide or contaminant presence coming from overseas, which have different regulations than in Europe, but that's really very, very hard. So that's not a route that I would put my money on.
Hopes for.
No. So I would rather, but in the end, it is about feed security as well.
Yes, of course.
And that is also something that is very important. So in the end, probably the authorities will bend a little bit if feed security is really getting into the at risk.
Robert, what do you think about the authorities and the flexibility that it will have upon the entire sector?
I have that wish on my bucket list as well.
Everybody.
No, I mean, I think as Geke says, when the pressure gets high enough, we will need to act, and desperate times call for desperate measures, and I think everybody will at some point realize that.
Yeah, true that. Let us go. I have opened up for you in the final minutes. Should you have any questions to one or for the entire panel, please raise your questions via the Mentimeter. Sustainability. So a little bit about the greening and the sustainability. Of course, recognized drivers here within Europe and also within the European agricultural policy, while they are a global movement, of course. I mean, we are one world, and if we do, there are no borders. Gases, deposits, I mean, everybody knows that. Assumedly, we were assisted in the last decades on reduction of production in several countries and centralization of production in a few export markets. If we look to the sustainability. And if we look at the same time at the unprecedented times, Robert, that you mentioned, what are your views on the nearby future if we take into account that we have actually to do two things? The difficulty is growing maybe more crops with less impact and a reduction on the climate. That sounds like something that is, at least let us put it that it's in difficulty. Let me not make it worse than it already is. How are we coping with that? What are your views?
Yeah, well, I think, to be honest, yes, it might sound difficult, but it's the only thing we need to do. And with that, we need intelligent companies and intelligent people to help us deliver more with less. And that can be in all kinds of things, but I don't think we have an option.
But what are the first things that we have to do if we have to do it? Because we have to feed the world, and we have to, and we know that it is rising and increasing. And at the same time, I mean, you were mentioning it in your presentation as well, sustainability is key. We have to reduce, it is not a question to do that. So we have to do both. But I mean, if we continue on the same scale as we're doing now, then we know what happens. So we have. Is there enough innovation? How are we going to cope with that?
Yeah, no, I think in the feed industry, I think the first thing with all these things, it comes with knowing where we are, knowing what where we are today. What is the footprint today of our diets? What is the footprint that we bring to customers? I think the feed is responsible for a big part of the cost for farmers, but also a huge part of the impact. So I think with that, the feed industry has a big responsibility to, first of all, find out, okay, so what is that impact? And then when you know what that impact is, from which ingredients, from which regions, you could then start looking, how could we reduce that?
Okay, so
do we have other ingredients available with a lower footprint? This is something we need to do also in these desperate times when prices are increasing and availability is limited.
Ernst? What's your take on this?
In my opinion, the footprint of the feed industry is just one footprint. The other footprint will be the animal farming, where our product is going right to it. And there might be bigger pressures on the animal farming, which will affect the feed milling industry in a certain way. I see also an opportunity to go more frequently into organic feed, which would also be a contribution to climate protection or climate change in a certain way.
I think organic is still a niche, and yes, that might be growing, but it's still relatively small. I do think that feed industry is taking action, and we should. And at some point, somewhere, we should just put an ambition on the ground and say, this is what we're going to deliver on, and then find ways to get there.
There's no one way, of course. Organic is a part, but it is not the whole.
There's many things.
There's many things. Geike, what's your...
Well, I totally agree what the gentlemen are saying. And what we need is really creativity and looking in a different way at these challenges. So they are certainly challenges, but I also think that when we get the right people together and think, we have to really move, but also think in a different way about how we can bring and reduce the carbon footprint. And I think it's also great that we are in the industry where we actually can make that difference.
Yes.
So we are the ones that have to make it happen. And I think it's great that we are sitting here to do that.
Yes, and we have reached the end of this table discussion. So thank you, Robert. Thank you, Geike and Ernst. And Ernst, you're up next for the presentation, so I will give you the opportunity to walk to your presentation booth for now. So, ladies and gentlemen, when grain availability is getting volatile, quality is sometimes compromised. Ernst Neff will talk about strategies and opportunities to maintain feed quality throughout the feed production process and storage. And he will also elaborate on ways to reduce energy consumption because, like previously mentioned, pretty hot topic these days. So, Ernst, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning or good afternoon to all of you around the world, and welcome to the FeedTechnoVision 2022, also from my side. Thanks for the introduction about me, and so we can go directly to my first part of my topic, which is optimizing process technology in times of grain and energy scarcity. Of course, well, I believe all of you agree that with a global feed production of roughly 1 billion tons in 2021, the feed milling industry definitely is an important link in the food chain. Even though growth increasingly moves to Asian, recently also to African countries, the task of our industry will still remain the same. We want to manufacture high-quality feeds and ensure that every animal receives in their daily ration the nutrients and active substance in sufficient quantity and correct quality. So what are the Is it not moving? Wrong. Okay. So what are the challenges and opportunities in case of raw material scarcities? A huge effort must be placed to the raw material procurement, but also to nutritionists and formulators to find new alternative products in good qualities, sufficient amount, reasonable prices, and of course in shortest delivery time. Whatever these raw materials are looking like, in many cases agro-industrial byproducts, variations in product properties like physical, chemical, but also specific characteristics will change in comparison to our standard products and are affecting our manufacturing process. Of course, manufacturing process starts at the intake of raw material and it ends at the dispatch of finished products. But we want to focus on core processes like dosing and weighing, size reduction, mixing, pelleting, and cooling. However, there is one issue most plants around the world facing in common. We need short-term solutions, and we are forced to work with what we got in terms of plant layouts and equipment, and must try to do our best to maintain quality and plant efficiency as good as possible. Means in the first stage, we have to optimize existing processes, possibly raise the awareness to our production and maintenance staff to operate their equipment in a more efficient way. Long-term solutions associated with major investments like plant modifications, new plant, need time to be planned, and this time currently is not available. That's why minor investments with short delivery times, short paybacks, and benefits for the future might be a possibility. Why not? So, looking at, besides the scarcity of raw material, in many regions, they are suffering on bottlenecks of skyrocketing prices in power supply. For this reason, it must be of interest to have at least an idea about specific power consumption in individual process sections. Obviously, conditioning and pelleting together with size reduction are responsible for approximately 75% of the total energy and are those processes with the biggest energy savings potential. There is not much energy to save on the other sections because a chain conveyor or a bucket elevator, for instance in an intake system, just needs a certain motor size to convey the product from point A to point B. Hence, approximately 90% of the 60% electric energy is used to drive motors and the rest is for accessories. The 40% thermal energy mainly invested into steam generation for the conditioning process. Compressed air will be discussed later on in part 2. So good quality starts with high accuracy in the dosing and weighing section. While scraping together all kinds of suitable raw materials, their varieties in different qualities and properties will increase. These may ask for additional bins, proportioning bins, and possibly a bin reallocation for some raw materials. The question is then, are we having raw material bins, and is their design and the associated dosing element, together with the subsequent size of the batch scale, suitable for the new product? For accuracy reason, the smallest dosed quantity not supposed to be less than 4% of the scale capacity. So dosing suddenly a high-density product from a system-optimized low-density product bin leads usually to unacceptable overweights, at least in the first few batches. In such cases, initial set values for fine dosing and pre-cutoff weights must be redefined for the new product. Grinding is one of the key processes for a successful pelleting process. As shown in the example of barley and corn, different raw materials are different to grind. As a rule of thumb, we can say higher the fiber, fat and moisture content, higher the energy consumption, lower the throughput rates on the grinders, and in the meantime also particle size distribution will change. An idea about grindability of different products will be given by the so-called GKW factor, which is a specific energy factor. So in this case, common optimizing possibilities are frequent screen changes, which are labor-intensive, time-consuming, and limited in flexibility. Much more advisable is the use of VSD drive, variable speed motors, variable speed drives in main motors of hammer mills to optimize particle size with circumferential speeds of the beaters, providing higher flexibility, less downtimes, and energy savings. Overall, an improvement in the grinding efficiency in general. Potential of energy savings by correcting deficiencies in grinding plants. Screens, as shown on the slide screen, purchased quite often in the local market, often not showing the correct configuration. Wrong hole arrangement, too small of open screen areas are resulting in lower efficiency of the plant. 60 degrees in hole arrangements in direction of rotation and 30 to 50% of open screen area are standards nowadays. Well-designed aspiration systems are indispensable in horizontal grinders, but often poorly maintained. Lack of air volume due to jammed filter bags or missing differential pressure gauges. Long exhaust lines ask for higher negative pressures on the fan, hence more energy is required. Beaters are typical wearing parts. The more wear advances, the lower their efficiency. So beaters must never become shorter than original length. For instance, shown in the picture, 5 to approximately 10 millimeter absolute minimum. At what stage to change the beaters depends very much on energy requirements compared with the spare part costs. All these deficiencies have a direct impact on energy consumption or capacities, heat increment of the product, and finally also to the average particle size distribution of our finished products. Potentials for energy savings associated with moderate investments into the plant layout. Application of roller mills in combination with hammer mills in pre-grinding as well as in post-grinding plants counts today as a state-of-the-art grinding technology. Besides a more uniform particle size distribution, remarkable energy savings up to about 30% can be achieved, depending of course on product properties and required particle size. After the pre-screening section in a post-grinding plant, the product passes to the roller mill, will be ground, and it goes afterwards into second screening sections and fractioning section, and the finally remaining 30 to 40% of the total batch size will then join the second grinder. In case of layer feeds, there are a possibility to bypass the second hammer mill section completely. Furthermore, roller mills provide a more gentle treatment of the product, what generates less heat and accordingly less moisture losses, which is also of importance. Achieving a good homogeneity within shortest time, this is the goal of the mixing process. Providing ingredients in terms of particle size and bulk density are as uniform as possible. But on the other hand, bulk density of the mixture directly relates to the permissible batch size in kilograms, given by the mixer capacity in decimeter cube or liters, multiplied by the bulk density in kilos per decimeter cube. Lower the bulk density, smaller the batch size will be. Overfilled mixers are not able to provide a good homogeneity. Energy, moisture and other shortages in alternative products might have to be compensated by the addition of liquids into the mixer. This within a given minimum and a given maximum time as shown in the graph, 20 to 30 seconds of minimum time, maximum 60 seconds for a maximum time. After the mixing process, liquid addition, the mixer needs a certain dry mixing time, and this dry mixing time is very much depending on the model of the mixer. As you can see there, it says about 2/3 for certain mixer types. On other ones, it's a longer period. So, and then after dry mixing time, we should be already close to a CV below 5 before we add the liquids, because liquids are going to stabilize the mixture, and if you add it too early, we won't reach the CV below 5. Then after the liquid addition, we will go for a certain wet mixing time, and after this wet mixing time, the mixer is supposed to be discharged or stopped. This to avoid demixing effects and the waste of energy. In case of frequent starts, the use of soft starters are recommendable. So much to my first part of the presentation. I will see you again in the second part.
So thank you so much, Ernst. Right now at the table, we still have Geke with us, and also Paul Kolen. He is the Livestock Program Manager for Middle East and Africa at Trouw Nutrition. You joined it in 2011, working in various roles such as Product Manager for Selco Feed Additives and Global Program Manager Feed Safety. And right now, actually, you gained practical experience in the industries in Asia, in Latin America, and in Africa. So we're happy that you're here as well. First of all, I have a couple of questions for you, Ernst, and then I will open up the discussion for the rest of the table. Let me start with the person that asks about globally, up to 30% of harvested raw materials are wasted due to poor storage management, somebody says. How can we improve the raw material storage management? What's the...
Okay, storages in certain areas, it's a must, depends on the delivery. Yes. There are a number of feed mills without storage silos, that's just a day-to-day base. But where you have storage facilities, it is important that the storage facilities are equipped with the right equipment. So especially in Asian countries where the climate is quite hot and humid.
Humid also, yes.
You must have
high humidity.
Yes, you must have aeration systems, ventilation systems for the bins in order not to take the risk of mold formation and, what should I say, cellular respiration of the raw material and spoiling the raw material. And this is very often not the case. And the other thing is, the best thing is to have it in short as possible time in storage silos.
Yes. Then a couple of other questions. Somebody says, hello, sir. That's you. For which type of animals pellet feed is advisable more? Thanks for your presentation, by the way.
Okay. For which type of animals? Basically, nowadays, pellets are almost used for all kinds of animals, livestock animals, except layer feeds.
All right.
Layer feeds in many regions still in mash feed, and there are different opinions. Some people say never pelletize layer feed, okay. And other ones says why don't we pelletize it and crumble it afterwards. So opinions among nutritionists and the production guys, it's very different. But the rest of the animals, it's basically all in pellets, at least for now. There are in certain areas there are trends to go away from pelleted feed again in order to save energy. As you have seen in the presentation, pelleting, it's the largest energy consumer.
A huge amount of, what was it?
60%. 60%
in the whole process. Yes. Any add-on, Paul?
Yeah, maybe. I think it's also considerably where you're allocated. No, so you see still in parts of Africa that still broiler feed is particularly mash feed, so not pelleted yet. I think the larger part of Asia and for sure Europe and Americas is pelleted feed, and I agree with you. Yeah, the layer feed is more or less the mash feed. But then with the mash feed, you have the uncertainty of the quality factor. Huh?
Yes,
it doesn't have the heat treatment. So. So you need to overcome or mitigate the potential risk.
Yes.
In order to safeguard the feed. Yeah.
Yes. A couple of other questions, very specific, so let me choose. Again, somebody asked, Mr. Ernest, what do you mean by liquid addition in the mixer? And please, can you explain it a little bit more, the mixing cycle?
Mixing cycle. Okay, all right. So when it comes to liquid addition,
Yes.
then we are talking, first of all, we are talking about the mixing time.
Okay.
And the mixing time is defined by the mixer, type of the mixer. Let's say 3 minutes.
Okay.
For a conventional mixer, 3 minutes.
Yes.
Mixing, the liquid addition time takes maximum 60 seconds. And the liquid addition time does not count as mixing time in the control system. The control system says, for instance, for a mixer with 3 minutes of mixing time, 2/3 are dry mixing.
Yes.
And then we expect, that our CV is already close to the 5% line or even below.
CV is in coefficient of
variation. Correct, yes. And then we add the liquids, and after liquid addition, after this maximum of 1 minute, we are going to continue mixing for a conventional mixer for another minute, to 1/3 of the mixing time, and then we discharge.
Okay.
Quite often, there is not an enable to discharge, and then in many plants, the mixer just keeps going until you get the enable. And during this time, over mixing time, you are going to take the risk of a demixing effect.
Okay.
And the demixing effect could be anything. It could be within the 5%, or it could do waves much bigger. Nobody knows. Has scientifically not been evaluated, and most probably nobody will do it because we shouldn't do it.
Okay. And now a very specific question pops up. I will raise it. Don't know if you. Somebody says we had a case that we add water plus surfactant and no improvement of the final feed moisture. Could you please explain the reasons behind that?
Not improvement in feed moisture. Okay. I guess we had to look a little bit more in details
yes,
in this
suppose,
case.
Yes, yeah.
In this case, but maybe Paul could say something.
I'd like to save the question for my pitch, because I give some tools how feed millers can contribute to analyze their own moisture profile in order to analyze if I'm going to add a preservative in combination with water, will it do any effect?
Benefit. Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much. So please. Listen very carefully to the presentation that subsequently Paul will have, and otherwise please raise again the question, and then we will elaborate on that. Yes. Okay, and then finally, and then I will open up for everybody. What do you recommend, pre or post grinding system?
Nowadays it's post grinding systems,
and that's also what you recommend.
Yes, it's the main reason is investment costs.
Okay.
Pre-grinding systems are much more expensive, space consuming, and cost intensive.
Okay. Of course, the main question right now should be, what impact do you expect in raw materials characteristics in your market? So how can we improve? Other question that is a little bit similar to that is that somebody asked, what should the strategy be? What is the strategy, and what to do to minimize maybe the downtime of the factory, especially when we have to deal with different feed recipes or to accommodate urgent orders from customers? Could you say something briefly about the downtime of the factory?
Downtime of the factory, it's very much related to the way the plant is operated by the operating staff, by the production staff, and by the maintenance crew. I believe.
Yes.
So a well-maintained plant and a well-organized production, the downtimes actually it's limited to a few minutes maybe.
Okay.
But I have shown you, for instance, one example for screen changes. If you have to change the screen on a hammer mill, you have to wait until the hammer mill is stopped from coasting around. Yes. Takes 20 minutes, open it, clean it, put the new screen in. Easily you're losing a half an hour.
Yes.
And this is maybe something we should look into automation.
Yeah.
For
or
instance,
train to do it quicker.
Yeah, you cannot do it quicker unless you're going to break it by hand, which is not allowed.
No, let's not do that. What impact do you expect in raw materials characteristics in your market? That's actually the question that I've raised also for the attendees. And also here, of course. Let me just briefly ask this question, Geke, first to you and then Paul. What impact do you expect in raw materials characteristics in your market?
Well, first of all, also to add a little bit on what Ernst was saying, when I look at characteristics of crop, so I always, from a quality perspective, you always think, well, what can I prevent? What can I prevent? And when you have prevention of, for example, hazards like salmonella or then everything becomes easier afterwards. But I know when you are growing crops, when you are harvesting crops, some things you cannot avoid. You cannot. You have birds flying over your crops, and you can have salmonella in your crops. So. And that's something, and that's again, like we have to face that as a fact. We cannot just say, okay, we are going to grow without it.
To minimize it
We minimize
completely.
it, yeah, but you minimize it, but you cannot have
Avoid
100% certainty. So you have to do something in the course of your process to avoid that. And one of the things is, of course, that we then need to preserve and take care when you have the storage that you have no growth. Apart from having short storage, but also looking again at the things that you are going to talk about is preservation. So I think in looking at characteristics, it is very much that we have to be ready to accept that sometimes product coming in doesn't always have the quality that we used to have. So we need to preserve better, take much care of that, and also do a lot of more testing probably. So normally I'm thinking in quality assurance is preventing, but in this situation we also really have to look very careful at the testing that we do, the quality controls that we do of our raw materials, both on the physical chemical parameters, but also on things like pesticides, salmonella, to make sure that what's not good is kept out of the factory and is not giving us costs in production and then having to reject in the end of the process anyway. So for me, that are the kind of things we really need to have a different way of looking at.
Paul, what is your take on the impacts on raw materials characteristics?
Yes, I believe it's an interesting question, although I would like to combine it with the previous question as well, about the downtime. The downtime. When you have variability in your quality of incoming raw materials, you need to test. You need to be on top of things, and right at the gate, you need to have lined up your quality parameters. And when we preserve, we mainly preserve to avoid recontamination. Hence, when you have downtime in your feed mill, the more likely you will have contamination. Imagine that you will have condensation in the cooler, in the head of the cooler. And for sure, Ernst will talk about that in the next presentation as well. These are all spots or at dead ends of conveyors that can result in salmonella or enterobacteria.
So it should be cleaned and...
Should be cleaned. You need to have thorough cleaning of your feed mill, and the shorter your downtime is, the less likely you will have contamination there, because it's always running. These troubles will start when you have shifts of only 8 hours, and then have the standstill time for a reasonable time.
All right. If I see some reactions that the attendees are giving right now on the question, what impact do you expect in raw materials characteristics in your market? Some say higher prices. Some say it can affect the quality of feed, palatability. Another person says less homogeneity, less precision feeding, and you can react upon that. And another person says, well, more extreme weather conditions nowadays due to climate change would reduce the quality of raw materials. For instance, more contamination of various mycotoxins. In which one I saw that you were agreeing on some...
I would a little bit connect to what Keike said already. Sampling of raw material is nothing new. We have done it for the last decades. But today, with different raw materials from different spots, from suppliers, we do not know until now.
Yes.
Nothing bad against them, but I think we have to put, or I believe we have to put much more emphasis on sampling of raw materials in the intake pit.
Sampling of raw materials in the intake
then
bit,
analyze
yes.
it.
Because
The sample
then
will be analyzed.
you're much more sure about what's going in. Actually.
Maybe in this connection, quite often what I have seen, samples are taken from a truck, somewhere back of a sample while the truck was discharging. So the discharging part was just the end of the truck, what was in the front of the truck. There is no sample taken from there.
So that's bad sampling, actually.
So samples must be taken from everywhere in the truck.
Okay, which is not a minor detail what you're saying right now. Paul, do you agree that often
totally.
that happens?
Because it is ideal to take a cross pooled sample along the truck, that from every part.
Yes.
And sometimes when it comes in by boat, you even further need to distinguish your points where you take actually
Yes, there are plants that are doing it.
Yeah.
Sophisticated
But there are also
plants
plants that are not doing it, if I believe.
There are also a lot of plants who not at all take a sample. They say, okay, it looks yellow, so it's supposed to be corn, it's okay.
How does it
maybe
smell?
they smell.
Good quality.
And then, obviously when there is...
Well, you're laughing right now, but I mean, since it is happening,
Yeah,
what are the
it is.
risks? Well,
Nah,
could you maybe emphasize it a little bit?
When you have a lot of sand and calf in corn, for example,
Yes.
it's not the corn particle that's going to be molded in a warm and humid environment. It is the sand and the calf surrounded by the corn that will pick up the molds first, and then the spot will be enlarged.
Yes.
And so clean, purified raw material is essential.
Yeah. But on top of that,
Yes, take
what
it.
is also so this is very important, but in the end it's a joint effort. So we also have to look at, okay, who are the suppliers? What is the transport looking like? How to be able to look at, to do the right controls, to know what to control in order to verify whether the quality is good. Because you cannot test everything always. So it is really a combined effort together with the people from quality, the people from production, the people from QC, who together can make a very good sampling plan to decide what do we really need to look at in order to make sure we have the right quality
So
in
what
our
should
process.
be, according to you, Gekebe, the attention if you are sourcing raw materials locally? I mean, what is very key?
Well,
to
what for me is very key when we are sourcing locally. Sometimes it is even more important to go there. So it's not to physically go there and to really see and have a good relationship with your supplier to make sure you get the right materials. So
yes.
I think
which
having
in the
that
pandemic, of course, was sometimes
difficult. But in the end, when it is really local, then I really invite people to go to the suppliers, to work with them, to have the relationship, because that gives you the best chance that you receive the right quality.
Paul?
Virtually with the camera, but it's good to support people and to understand when they source, to stick with the corn example, when they source local corn, that moisture values might variate a lot. So in that essence, it's good to trigger moisture values and to know that when it's over 15 or 16%, that you might potentially have a risk in storing it for a longer period.
Yes.
So then you need to evaluate. Am I ready to add an additional insurance to that to safeguard my raw materials?
Another question popping in right now because we were talking about the sampling, and one person says, I have one question, how to take sample from one truck sampling system?
Normally, what I know at least is that you at least take 5 points.
5 different points
in each corner.
In the inside, on the outside.
Let's say 1 meter from the edge of the corner.
Yes.
4 points, and then in the middle 1 or 2. And together you will create a pooled sample.
Yes.
And that gives you
a good impression
and the size of the boat, truck, whatever. When you at least do that, then you have from
more certainty that it is representative for what is in.
Yeah.
You agree?
Actually, there is an unwritten law, we can say, where it says how many samples to be taken from a smaller truck and from a bigger truck. From a smaller truck, maybe 4 samples are sufficient. From a huge truck with 40 ton, then you might have to take 8 or even more.
Okay.
The same counts, not all raw materials, it's supplied by trucks, by bulk. In some cases, it's delivered by bags.
Yes.
And then also bags. Let's say in large shipment, every 5th or every 100th bag.
And is
it still an estimate of the quality of the total batch? Yes. Because something like a salmonella, or they are not sitting like homogeneously throughout the batch. So it is still, and that's why I keep on insisting on that you take samples. That's a very good indication, but you also need to look at prevention, looking at the supply performance, etc. And that gives you the total picture.
Okay,
and avoid recontamination in your plant.
Yes.
This is the biggest problem.
That's the biggest problem. Thank you for now. Thank you for now, because we are going to conclude this part, Geke, Paul and Ernst. And of course, when we are back, we are going, Ernst, to listen to your second part of the presentation. And you will continue to focus on adaptations needed to remain competitive and to produce high quality feed. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is right after the short break that we have. Let's say we have, let's say 10-12 minutes of break. We will start again at 10:30 Central European time, and that is approximately 12-13 minutes from now. Short break, and I hope to see you in a while with the second presentation, of course, of Ernst Neff, and of course subsequently the table discussions. Thank you, see you in a while. And welcome back, everybody. Before the break, you have listened to Ernst Neff on optimizing process technology in times of grain and energy scarcity. We've had a fruitful discussion here at the table. And now in this second part, he will continue to focus on adaptations needed to remain competitive and to produce high-quality feed in times of raw material scarcity and, of course, high energy prices. Remaining profitable without losing quality is a key topic. The questions are again open via the Mentimeter system. And of course, I will shortly open it up again, a few seconds for anybody that has lost the connection with the Mentimeter system. Just briefly scan the QR code right now. Then you are sliding into the system. A very easy way to raise the questions for the speakers that are here. Here's still two to come, and of course all the panelists, and we have some questions for you, but if you have questions for us, please feel free to raise them. The questions are of course for Ernst Neff. Ernst, we're listening to you.
So welcome back to part 2, where we will continue with pelleting and cooling. Just come to the first slide. Compacting as a refining process for the mixed mash leaves not much space to optimize process technology as a short-term solution. Much more, we should make sure or ensure that apply the few parameters available in a most efficient way. Influencing factors like physical and chemical properties and mash preparation, which includes also the grinding section in group raw material and mash, as you can see on the top, contributes to approximately 55 to 65% on the behavior of pelleting, which determines finally the pellet quality and the power consumption of the pellet mill. Exactly the top two, these physical and chemical properties, are currently the troublemakers, because we are obliged to utilize what's available and payable in the market. Most parameters like the circumferential speeds of the die and roll diameters and others in group machine and pellet mill on the bottom must be selected as early as when a pellet mill is purchased. So what's left finally, it's basically group process and process control, means steam conditioning, throughput regulation and moisture content or moisture control. Why steam conditioning? The stability of a pellet depends very much on number and size of solid material bridges and adhesive forces at the contact point of two particles, as you can see it in the slide in brown color. By steam conditioning, we are introducing energy, heat and moisture. What softens the solid particles means generating more and larger solid material bridges, contributing to higher stability. Liquid bridges, or so-called capillary forces, are formed by natural moisture natural moisture in the mash and the added steam, which condensates then, and contributing further to the stability of the pellet. In general, we can say higher the conditioning temperature, better the quality, and lower the energy consumption. But everything has a limit. So, for instance, due to maximum moisture content and destruction of nutrients, steam conditioning is limited somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 85 degrees. All just mentioned above only happens by providing slightly superheated steam, means steam temperature must be at least 5 to 10 degrees above saturated steam temperature. What does it mean in the diagram? Steam installation and steam quality is the main issue in many plants for low conditioning temperatures, too high product moistures, frequent pellet mill chokes, weak quality pellets, and elevated energy consumption. So let's take a closer look at the function of some important steam fittings. Steam supplied from the boiler at 7 to 9 bars usually arrives as wet steam at the plant. So it needs to be dried and transferred into superheated steam. This process takes place at the mechanical water separator. You can see it in yellow color in the first stage, and by the PRV, the pressure reducing valve, as a second and final stage. The following thermometer and the pressure gauge at the top are the most important elements in the total installation, will inform us about the steam quality. Obviously, if one or the other is missing, which is quite often the case, no information about steam quality is available, and we are walking in the dark and guess why the pellet mill chokes. Looking at the die configuration, or rather the dwell time in the die hole, this is one of the only available parameters from the pellet mill side to optimize the pellet quality. It can be influenced by the number of holes in the die. This would require more holes, a wider die or a bigger die, or by other words, a bigger pellet mill. Another possibility is to increase the volume of the die hole, requires a thicker die, what automatically raises the resistance in the die hole, means an increase in energy consumption and possibly a lower conditioning temperature. Or, as a real-time solution, reduction in throughput. This is, of course, not a desirable solution, but often no other choice available, because neither a bigger pellet mill nor a thicker die at this moment is available. As a rule of thumb, we can say the longer the dwell time, the better the pellet quality. However, above 5 to 6 seconds of dwell time, improvements tend to stagnate. Associated with a moderate investment, applications of automatic roll gap adjustment would also be another possibility to improve qualities of finished products. Some essential points to consider in optimizing the pelleting process in general. Die hole diameter and the length of the hole determines the compression ratio of the die, and there we find common and economical ratios in the range of 1 to 10 to 1 to 15. Dies with parallel hole arrangements, as you can see on the top of the print, perform better than staggered hole patterns. They will lower the energy requirement, they are easier to start up, and the service wear will be more uniform. Die damages could arrive, or excessive wears lead to increasing energy consumption or a decrease in throughput. In this case, refurbishments or replacements of the die will solve the problem. For a high reliability, press rolls supposed to show a large diameter and a grippy surface. This kind of press rolls are going to reduce the roll slippage or the relative movement in between the die and the roll, and consequently consuming less energy. Poor product distribution results in an uneven wear, irregular pellet quality, and a loss in capacity. Therefore, deflectors need to be regularly adjusted, or if they're worn out, they need to be replaced. Finally, also an automated process control contributes to energy saving. Set values like conditioning temperature and throughput rates usually are on a higher level and are faster reached than with manual control. Cooling and drying for safe and trouble-free storage conditions, optimized by adjusting retention time and the air volume, which is more often required with frequent changes in product property, but also of different pellet diameter. In terms of retention time, the question is who is going to move the level probe to adjust the product layer in the cooler? Question mark. In terms of air volume, who is going to position the butterfly, usually on the 8th or 10th floor, to adjust the exhaust air system? Also, there is a question mark. Much more reliable and lower in energy consumption is an online adjustment by locating the cooler on load cells or control the product layer by radar sensors and operate the fan motor with a variable speed drive. To achieve the target value in temperature and moisture, as indicated on the slide, the system will select automatically always the first as a first parameter the more economical parameter. So, for instance, in case of too high of product temperature, we are going to increase the retention time, which is cost-free, and in case of too high moisture in the product, then we are going to decrease the air volume in order to save energy. So always the more economical one first. So finally, coming to the moisture management, online control improving quality and efficiency by compensating moisture fluctuations in the raw material. The target, of course, is to have a constant moisture content at the pelleting process, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 17%. Depends a bit on the region. This will provide good and constant pellet quality. It will also lower the energy consumption. That means there are savings in energy, and will give higher availability of the pellet mill because we are having less chokes of the pellet mill. Last but not least, there also will be less product spoilage and less mold formation of the product in the storage bins, in the plant, or also at the farm. So how does it work? We are going to measure the moisture content and the temperature in the mixer and compare it, mixer or in the surge hopper in front of the pellet mill. Two opportunities possible, and are going to compare it with the set value of the conditioning temperature, and then we calculate the quantity of water to be added in a combination with mold inhibitors or surfactants, this is an option, to obtain the required moisture content at the pellet mill. The same will be done at the cooler to control the moisture content and the temperature of the finished product by controlling online, as I mentioned before, the retention time in the cooler and the air volume, both online by locating the cooler on load cells and driving the fan motor by a variable speed motor. So I was talking, variable speed drives have been mentioned many times during the last hour, so it's about time to show you how it works and what the benefits are. On the example of a fan controlling the air volume, once with a damper and once with a variable speed drive. So you can see on the graph on the top, it will be with the control with the damper, and the lower graph, it's the control with a variable speed drive. Concentrate a little bit on the blue points. I cannot point it, but if you look at it, then you will be able to follow. Looking at the first one with the damper, if you reduce the air volume from 100% on the horizontal axis down to 80%, you will see there is a blue point up there which shows that you're going to save about 10% of energy from 100 to 80. If you do the same thing with a variable speed drive, then you will see on 80% air volume, the blue point, that means the energy consumption drops down to about 55%. So there is a delta T in energy of about 35%. That means with a frequency converter, we will have savings up to 40% in this case, without any efficiency losses. Another advantage of the frequency converter will be if you change the fan speed, you're also going to change the air volume in a linear way. This will not happen if you close the butterfly, for instance, by 20%. There is no guarantee that 20% less air volume passing through the duct, or more or less 20%. Another point to save energy, potential for energy improvements by adapting the motor efficiency levels. Since 2014, the 4 efficiency levels are the new standards, starting with IE1 to IE4, from low standards to super premium efficiency. Since 2017, E3 levels for new driven motors are compulsory. IE2 levels for new variable speed drives motor are still accepted, but also there better to have IE3 or 4. So in grinding and pelleting sections and other sections, there we have still large motors, and many of them are quite old motors with efficiency classes or levels from IE1 or even below, and not even indicating anything about the efficiency, and a replacement with EI3 or EI4 motor level will give you savings in energy, but also stability under partial load range. For instance, if you look at the graph, you will see smaller motors will have bigger energy savings, but only in percent, not in kilowatts. For instance, if you take a 15 kilowatt motor as an example, shown in the graph, then you will have savings of about 8%, which corresponds to approximately 1.2 kilowatt. If you move over to a 200 kilowatt motor, then you will see the savings are only about 4%, but in kilowatts, it will be, instead of 1.2, it will be 8 kilowatts. Then, coming to my last slide, I mentioned it already before, I promised to come back to compressed air as an underestimated cost driver. Why is it so? First, some basic recommendations on compressed air systems. Keep the pressure low as possible. Reduction of 1 bar results in an energy savings of about 5 to 6%. So pressures around 4 to 5 bars are normally sufficient. Applying a variable speed drive, as just mentioned before, gives you, as we have seen, savings in between 20 to 40%, a possibility. And also there is a possibility to recover energy, for instance, heating rooms or to heat water. Not very common, but in some areas possible. The most important part, and this is the reason why it's an underestimated cost driver, find leakages and eliminate them. Small leakages are also cost effective. And in this context, I advise you to walk once through your plant on a Sunday morning when the plant is stopped, instead to going to church, and you will hear in each floor in several points, psst, psst, psst. That means leakages everywhere. And if you look at the example in the graph of a 1 millimeter hole, what the savings are, then it makes sense to find these leaks and eliminate them. Proper adjustment of the plant equipment who requires compressed air. It's also another issue. For instance, aspiration system, back filters, the length of the pulse intervals and the length of the pulse length could have a tremendous impact on the compressed air consumption. Finally, we can say preventive maintenance, it's another contribution to save production costs. Thank you. What is the time?
Thank you so much, Ernst, for your presentation. A lot of questions have been raised already. Some a little bit generic, some a little bit specific. So we badly need you here at the table. And at the table, we still are here with Paul and with Geke. So I will, of course, also enlarge the discussion. A couple of questions, and bear with me, Ernst. I mean, there are a lot. So if you give the short answer, I will do a lot of questions, and then we will write it.
Let's see.
Okay, there we go.
If I'm able to answer.
I don't know. Some are very specific. What is the main cause for pellets to crumble after manufacturing?
What is the main cause?
For pellets to crumble after manufacturing.
This is very much animal related. Usually crumbles are done for broilers, for instance, for piglets, because the pellet is just too big for the animal. But it is cheaper than to produce a 2 millimeter pellet and give it as a 2 millimeter pellet to the animal. So we are going to produce a larger pellet and then crumble it again. This is a cheaper solution.
That's a cheaper solution. Yeah. It's cost effective. Paul?
Yes, I'm not sure whether the question was about what is the essence of crumbling,
or why does it crumble?
Why does it crumble?
Yes,
because when it crumbles, it means that the quality of the feed of the process is not decent.
And what is that then? Heat or moist or?
Conditioning. In most cases, it's conditioning. And my experience from the plants I have seen around the world, the biggest problem is always the installation of steam and the steam quality. Because one of these two elements, thermometer or pressure gauge, is missing or broken.
Okay.
They're always indicating 6 bars because the needle is broken.
Okay. And that is actually a practical tip, like Sunday morning, have a
Yes,
walk.
yes.
And could you do the sound again? What do you hear?
No.
Yeah, and that's leakage.
Yes, yes.
Right.
But it's not for steam.
So in essence, when you're missing the required amount of steam, you won't get the compaction that Ernst was talking about.
And therefore it will crumble after
And- yes,
manufacturing.
yes. Too soon,
Yes,
yeah.
too soon.
Yeah.
Yes,
Too-
even
too
if
low
you
in
don't want
moisture
it.
content,
Yeah.
too low in conditioning.
Okay. Could you give some practical tips on how to adjust the cooler in hot climates?
In hot
When-
climates.
Yes, I mean,
Okay.
if we are in, for instance, Asia, hot climate, or Middle East, how could we, tips and maybe tops, what to do or what not to do to adjust the
The
cooler?
hot climate itself, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Because we said we want to cool it down to 5 to 10 degrees above ambient. And in hot areas, we rather go closer to 5 than to 10 due to avoid mold formation. The difficulties will be hot climates and high humidity,
The combination.
the combination.
So if it's a dry hot climate, that should be no problem.
Less of a problem.
But a high humidity combined with a
Could
hot...
be a problem.
And why
Could
is that a
be
problem?
Because you are not able to cool it down to the right, or to dry it down to the right moisture content. You are going to add again moisture with the incoming air.
Yes.
And I have seen plants in Far East countries where they have a big sign on the cooler what the humidity of the air is. And once they exceed a certain value, they just stop
They
the
just
plant for a certain time. Until the evening or in the night when the
Yes.
humidity comes down again.
Yeah,
Paul?
you see that as well in when we have more time, then Ernst could present as well the storage impact on absorption terms. So when you have Mother Nature dictates that when you have high relative humidity and you're storing in high relative humidity, measuring AW value of activity of free water, and the surrounding temperature is low relative humidity, then it means that it will find itself in equilibrium, so the moisture will disappear. And that is very often a request that you will get. Okay, what can you do to stop this? And it's a law of nature. So you only can delay it in a way, but you cannot overcome it.
Okay.
There is always the question, should we apply conditioned air?
Yes. And?
And the question is, yes, but you have to pay for.
And
Because
yes.
this is a huge volume of air which you have to condition. Just a short calculation.
Yes.
Plant capacity of 20 tons.
Yes.
It's a small plant, 20 tons.
Yes.
With a specific air volume consumption of 20 meter cubes per minute per ton per hour. Makes 20 times 20, makes 400 meter cubes per minute, which you have to air condition.
Wow.
This is just for a small plant.
Yes.
And just for one
sometimes
parameter.
it's not doable.
It's just too expensive.
Expensive to do so, yes. Let us go to some other questions that have been raised, very specific sometimes. Dwell time, die length, will it not reduce the expansion?
No.
No. Okay. I have learned that the die is critical part of the pellet feed mill,
Yes,
though.
it's most critical.
Yes, most critical. Then a question, a very specific one. During shortage of raw material, we can use low-cost raw materials by balancing nutritional contents, like sugarcane molasses. What the question is what is the difference between sugarcane molasses and molasses beet?
Beet molasses, it's a little bit lower in viscosity.
In viscosity?
Cane sugar, it's a bit higher in viscosity. So the bricks are a bit higher than in beet molasses usually.
Okay.
What is your opinion when you have very viscous molasses that you would like to lower bricks? And what I see is that some feed millers are adding water then to the molasses to have a more liquid fluid substance.
The adding water process, or let's put it this way, diluting molasses with water, it's not just a process, take 2 cups and a little bit of molasses and water. It's a long process. It takes, as far as I remember, about 7 hours to dilute molasses with water.
Yeah.
So much more advisable in this case, instead of just adding somehow water, it's to heat the molasses up to about 40 degrees. And usually we say molasses not supposed to have a higher viscosity than 600 millipascal.
Okay. Then another very specific question on how many percent, that really don't know if you know this by heart, but how many percent of the sugarcane molasses is recommended per ton of feed for chicken layer and cattle's dairy fattening?
Okay. I'm not a nutritionist, so I cannot give you the answer for the animal, but I can give you an answer for the process.
All right.
So for the process, you can go up to 5 to 6%.
Okay.
But always providing what kind of raw material you're going to utilize. If you utilize cheap raw material with poor pelleting properties, which is not going to absorb moisture, it will not absorb the molasses. And then you will have a problem.
Yes.
But technically, if you have to write, let's say, fiber, which absorbs molasses quite easily, or humidity in general, then you can go up to 5 to 6%.
Okay. Thank you. Superheated steam gives off heat less readily than saturated steam and takes more energy. Is there any research being done about that?
Can you repeat? Sorry?
Of course. Superheated steam gives up heat less readily than saturated steam and also takes more energy. Somebody states.
To produce?
Yes. Is there any research being done about that?
Not by myself.
No. Okay.
No, the problem to give maybe an answer. There are experts. They're saying we should utilize saturated steam or even wet steam, especially if you have dry raw materials. And then with wet steam, you're going to add, in the meantime, with the steam, you're going to add water. So you're going to raise the moisture content, but you do not know how much water you're going to add because it comes shockwise and uncontrolled. So we say slightly superheated steam, slightly above this line, 5 to 10 degrees, and then add the water with a water meter, with a flow meter, exactly what you want. Otherwise, you're not doing what you do not know what you do.
Okay.
Maybe it's good to
yes, Paul?
to turn around the question and to say why is it important to utilize dry steam? It takes time. It's easy to create heat, but it takes time before the heat comes in the particle. So you can imagine when you have a difficulty by adding liquid to feed, then they say, like Ernst was mentioning, feed millers are just jeopardizing steam quality and just adding more liquid water in the conditioner. By doing so, you will not achieve your temperature target, and will also delay the moment that the steam which is there available will really penetrate the feed. And as a consequence, then later in the process, you will have an inferior pellet quality.
Thank you so much. Final specific question, and then I will broaden up in a generic way. What do you recommend the normal mixing time for pre-mixing? And then second, when the mixing starts, can you guide about time? Let us focus at the beginning of the question. What do you recommend as the normal mixing time for pre-mixing?
Are we talking about pelleting or
I think about pelleting, yes. It doesn't say, but I'm assuming it as well.
I think it's dry mixing that they refer to, no?
Yes?
I guess.
So it goes back to the mixing plant?
I think so. It's one of the last questions, so it is...
In the feed mill or premix related?
What do you recommend as the normal mixing time for pre-mixing? And when the mixing starts...
Pre-mixing.
I think it's dry mixing time.
Dry mixing time in the mixer.
Yeah.
If it's related to the mixer, then I'm just going to repeat what I said before. At least 2/3 of the mixing time supposed to be dry mixing.
At least.
At least.
And yesterday you also made me a very valid comment that when you are utilizing a pedal mixer or a ribbon mixer, it can make a substantial difference, no?
Yes.
That's what can you elaborate what is the difference between pedal
For paddle mixers, or let's say I call it conventional mixers, long mixers where the length of the mixer is about 2-3 times the diameter. We say 2/3 of dry mixing time of the mixing time, 2/3 of the mixing time. And for modern mixers, paddle mixers, where the mixing time is much shorter, we say total mixing time before adding the liquids.
Yeah. And in this respect, it's really very important. You cannot just say it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes, or it is really, depending on the type of product, depending on the mixer itself. You always have to do this validation to really make sure that you have indeed the homogeneity that you are looking for, because there are so many factors influencing it that you have to do this validation testing. You cannot only calculate it.
In this context, any mixer supplier supposed to be able to tell you what the mixing time of the mixer will be and how much time you need to premix.
I assume that the person that has raised the question can also refer locally to his local account manager, I assume, because otherwise. But thank you again for all the very specific
But I just want to add
responses.
to that. It's in the commissioning and in the testing. It's always important to do a test as well to verify that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's so important.
We figured out that when it comes to sequencing in the right order, as you already discussed in the graph, that when you're adding oil and water for moisture management purposes or whatever, that it's vital first to apply the water solution in combination with the surfactant or mold inhibitor, and then the oil. Why? Because particles, when they get oily, the surface gets tightened and the water cannot penetrate anymore. So they cannot attach that well anymore. So in the sequence, it's good to have first the dry mixing,
and then
the water solution, then the oily solution, and then the total mixing down.
Let us broaden the question in how are you adapting to increasing process energy costs? Geke, how should you adapt the increasing process energy costs? I mean, what are, I don't know if there are easy steps to take. Let me state steps to take, to consider.
When it's about the technical stuff, I leave the word to Ernst. But what I am coming across as well is taking from a different perspective. For me, it all starts with maintenance. So making sure that what you produce, that you produce it correctly. Don't jeopardize on your maintenance budget in order to think you are doing fine, but in the end you will regret it. And what also is really very important is that the people working in the operations, that they have a very clear understanding of their role, what they need to do, that they have clear instructions. Because
what do you mean by that they have clear instructions? Because
when you have all these process controls, an operator really must know very well, like, can I push the button on this process control, or should I never touch it? Or so when these alarms are going off, what do I need to do to really make sure that in the process that you are continuously on top of that and that you adapt to that. So I think, and sometimes I say to people, because managers, they make big instructions, they know, they think they know exactly how to do it and tell the operators what to do. And what I sometimes tell to these managers is, just do a day in a life with an operator. Just stand next to this operator for the whole day and watch and see what he is doing the whole day. And then you have a much better understanding of what that operator needs from you to be able to do an excellent job. So that would be my advice for the managers.
Yes.
Do this and you will really learn a lot from the job that the operators are doing, because it's a very heavy job.
Okay. Paul, I mean, what would you say? I mean, if you had to, we have increasing process energy costs. I mean, but what should you do to adapt? Well, there's well, again, I don't know if it's an easy way. It should.
I think you can relate it to what is in your span of control. No?
Okay.
So the fact that you have fixed and variable costs is there tomorrow. It might, go up and go down. But what I see often in feed mills is when the biosecurity is in good shape. You have a clean floor. You basically can eat from the floor.
All right.
It's that clean.
All right.
Then you see as well that the staff is maintaining education of staff. The people make the difference. And really, in the operator in front of the palletizer, they are the one. They are the chef cuisine.
So if you're listening right now and you know that there's maybe some work in that field, what's the first thing that you should take?
Yeah, I think it's a good advice for plant managers to focus on biosecurity for several reasons, quality related, but as well to get the momentum in the feed mill that people are aware of their own product. And that is where you can make a difference, and that is where a farmer will distinguish your feed from your neighbor.
And that's what we want. Ernst, I mean, what would you be your... I mean, you have said
I
several things, of course.
I mentioned
yes.
several things, and my last sentence is maybe one of the most important ones you mentioned already. Maintenance, it's a good maintenance, preventive maintenance instead of breakdown maintenance. It's a good contribution to production, saving production costs. And the other thing is, in my opinion, also education of the operating staff, of the maintenance staff. It's in many places not good enough.
Okay, it's not good enough. So there's room for improvement.
They know where to start and they know where to stop. The two buttons they know.
Yeah.
The best example is the damper on the 8th floor, if you have paid attention. On the cooler. Who is going up to the 8th floor to close the damper? Because the elevator is broken.
Yeah.
Don't forget. You have to walk up on 45 degrees.
Yeah.
Oh no, too far.
Too far.
Yeah.
Just leave it.
And that's why it's so good if a manager works with such an operator
Yeah.
for the day, because then this manager is thinking like, okay, what can I do differently so that he has an easier job and will do it.
Yeah.
Because it
So-
has to happen, yes. And
Yeah.
finally, coming in, one of the remarks is that you could also consider energy contracts negotiations.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's very, but I mean, if you succeed,
I'm not sure whether there are many parties who will fix you now for a 3-year period. Now we increased 100%. So.
well, within Europe, I'm sure that I think they're not there. But since we have attendees from other parts of the world, there might be some local that is feasible. And if you can reduce the energy cost by, I don't know, even 5%, it's a lot. So, I mean, it's a tip. Within Europe, I think that it's utopia.
Depends very much where you live.
That it is, yes.
If you live in Middle East, there's enough energy.
Thank you so much, Ernst. Thank you so much, Geke and Paul. Paul, it is your turn now, so please, I will give you the floor at the presentation booth. While, of course, I remember the dear attendees that the questions are open for Paul Kolen. Subsequently, we will have here the final table discussion. And should you have a question, don't hesitate to raise it via the Mentimeter. And Paul has many years of experience, like I said, in working with professionals in the feed production industry, working with companies in Africa and Asia, also in the Middle East. And he will share some practical experience in how he was able to help feed producers improve their process, their feed quality. So implications for high temperature climate zones, it's a business case. And the floor, Paul, is completely yours.
Thank you very much. Let's see if I get my pointer working. Yes, there we are. So, yeah, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon again. Thank you for joining our live stream here at FeedTechnoVision, and more than happy to guide you through some ideas to further boost your margin potential or confirm whatever you already are doing now, at least to make you aware about certain risks you need to be willing to take, talking about raw material storage that we discussed earlier as well. So, in my opinion, what I see a lot is when margins are eroding at feed mill level, the first thing that nutritionists are doing and plant managers is to get rid of the most expensive raw materials or elements inside the recipe. So, you know, when you would like to lower cost in a feed mill, it could potentially be a strategy full of pitfalls, because in the end of the day, you need to evaluate what is the added value of each element. And it could be when you're adding particular micro ingredients like feed additives, which have a proven effect by lowering the feed conversion ratio at farm level, that it really is contribute value to leave them inside your recipe. So it's not just easy said and done to throw out the most expensive raw materials inside your equation and then go with the flow. Now, And for that reason, I believe it's what I try to focus on in this coming 50 minutes is to give you some practical ideas on the control of the quality of raw material. We got some questions on the storage of raw materials, dive a bit further into the compensation of moisture losses. And I also believe it's vital that every feed miller has its own internal validation, how to validate beneficial feed additives, you know. So to start with the first one, as Robert already mentioned earlier, on availability of raw materials, we talked with Geke a lot on the quality side there as well. I think even in times of scarcity or disruption or whatever elements comes to table that will jeopardize your potential quality of the raw material, testing. Make sure that you are in the front seat row, that you're aware of your own feed mill, that you are triggering whatever you need to trigger before that truck of corn is going to be unloaded in the pit, you know. So, and then easiest task is to have an assumption on the amount of mycotoxins which are potentially in there. Aflatoxin, DON, Agra, Fumonisin, T2. I just put on the slide just a practical overview of action limits that really could help out for feed millers to have an estimation. Okay, when you're above this particular threshold, sorry, you cannot unload because you're only jeopardizing my feed. And it's not bad to do so. For the rest as well with molds, when molds become visible, it's already too late, but there are over 1 million colony forming units. And with enterobacteria, the alarm bell is really over 10,000, but you know, it goes in a log scale very fast. Bacteria, molds needs free water, so when there is a lot of humid or free water around particles, yeah, that could cause bacteria. No, so good to have that in mind. And yeah, simple rule: when you have rubbish in, you will have rubbish out. So when your quality of your raw materials is already inferior from the start, don't expect that you can produce good quality feed. No, so it is also in your own benefit to be critical on the intake. Hence, what I also see is when there is disruption in availability, that feed millers are increasing their storage time, because then at least they have substantial amount of raw material in silos. No, so but then you need to be aware. Okay, what is the risk of storing in certain circumstances? And the US Grain Council made this nice graph, which is an indicator that when you would utilize corn, for example, of 15% moisture, and you would store it in an ambient environment of 35 degrees, then you effectively can store it for only 4 days without jeopardizing the quality of the corn. Now, when you are a feed mill and you're allocated in India or in Indonesia, and you have corn of 13% at 30 degrees, and you would likely to store it for 3 months, then you see in this graph that normally, effectively, you would store it for 1 month and a bit, in a good way, but then it starts to deteriorate when there is no aeration or no additional preservation tools inside the raw material. So you need to, what is the essence of this graph? You need to make your own risk evaluation, whether you like to have an extra insurance as for preservation, whether it is worthwhile for your way of storage that you're adding preservatives, yes or no. The only thing I can mention is that when there is impact of mold reduction, nutritional reduction by molds, then we see that the metabolic energy, the crude protein, and the fat content will go down, and on average that will result in a loss. There are a lot of scientists who already made that clear. There is not an overall rule that you say, okay, when you have 1 spot of mold, you will have 6% of loss, but easy calculation, as Pedro this morning already outlined, that 90% of the cost is due to raw material, then okay, when you calculate 6%, it's easy $15, and that's when corn would be $250 per ton. And I think in many cases it's even higher than that. No, so $15 loss, okay, can we mitigate that by adding a prevention in terms of or part of it as a prevention to overcome this loss? That is what you need to evaluate, and whether it is on corn with molds or more related to soy or other fatty raw material kinds that are likely to be contaminated with salmonella or enterobacteria, that is what you need to analyze. So yeah, all about analysis, a lot of analysis. I like analysis. So it's good when you are in a feed mill that you have certain analysis at your own disposal. I think that most of the guys, they have already moisture balances, they have pH meters, they have a pallet quality meter, PDI, perdurability. They have even NIR to get the more nutritional standards there. But also think about mold, entero counts, salmonella counts. I understand that not the common feed miller has the capability to trigger these contamination levels in feed, but it's good that you are aware that every now and then you send out a sample to either an external lab to have an understanding, okay, what is the quality and impact of my raw materials on these particular contamination rates. No? Different is that, in my opinion, for the mycotoxin analysis, because I believe that every feed mill should have its own quick test analysis to have an opinion on the incoming raw material in terms of mycotoxins. We all know that you cannot just by heat treatment get rid of mycotoxins. No, then other systems need to come in place to do so. We already briefly discussed on AW value. AW value is a way of measuring the free water activity in the feed that, I think in most cases is done in pet food. Pet food where you store for 12 to 18 months. They steer at a pH, AW value of 0.62. Molds are on average growing from 0.65 to 7. Bacteria are growing from 0.8 onwards, and the max is 1. Good to have an understanding of that as well. For sake of confirmation, it is also good when you are utilizing particular organic acids in the feed that you every now and then do a retention test. So whatever it is in an expensive feed additive that you are purchasing, is it coming down to the feed? No, so it's essential to trigger if your equipment is doing the right job. And talking of which, I believe that dosing equipment really assures 50% of your success. You can invest in a very good or expensive or whatever feed additive, but when it's a liquid and it needs to be dispersed evenly, let's say 1 kg or 10 kg in 1,000 kgs, you can imagine that you need to have good quality equipment with nozzles, like Ernst already indicated. It's important. Now, so far so good. I think that also elaborate a little bit on the moisture management topic. We got the question earlier. I didn't forget it. How come that you will lose moisture and we applied something and it doesn't work? Now, I think in essence you first need to think about, okay, where do I start? In this example, you start with, on average, raw materials are 12%. Then during the process, you're going to lose some moisture. That can be due to grinding or due to storage or whatever. Then you're going to add steam. And then in terms of steam, you're going to flash that off. And when you do not compensate, it will result in a particular loss. And whether it's 0.5% or 1% or 1.5%, in the more hot and humid climates, this will be really more a valid topic than in Northern Europe when you don't have particularly this issue. I'm aware. So if you know that you have this kind of issue, then I believe you should create first your own research. And that is something that you can do yourself. Create your own moisture profile. So you need to know exactly where you are gaining and or losing moisture throughout your process. So you see the blue spots, that's just an ID. Get some samples of the most relevant raw materials, soy, corn, you name it. Then take a sample after the mixer, take a sample after the conditioner, take a sample after the pelletizer, after the cooler, after bagging. And then you can draw your own line, and then you exactly see where you will lose your moisture. And overall, when you're adding additional moisture in your mixer, but you don't see any effect in the end of the day, then it means that most likely you will also see a drop down in your cooler profile. So most likely you flash off too much moisture in order to come to the 5 degrees variation between ambient temperature and pellet temperature. That could be one potential cause, but of course there are a lot of variables that can influence this. Also nice to know is that you will have an impression of the steam quality. Now, the better way is, like we learned from Mr. Ernst, that you need to have the 2 probes at the at the entrance of the steam line. But when, for whatever reason, you don't have these 2 temperature probes and pressure probes there, then there is also a theoretical way to calculate whether you are utilizing good quality steam. And in this example, when you are taking the sample at the conditioner, it's about the conditioning temperature. So assuming that you're producing poultry feed with 80 degrees, you are in a humid, hot climate, of which is 30 degrees, then delta, the difference is 50 degrees. And there is a rule of thumb that when you are utilizing good quality steam, you can divide it by 16. And then you end up that you can calculate, okay, that difference is nearly 3%, and 3% equals then the extra moisture you are adding in the conditioner. So to make it practical, when you compare the sample after the mixer with the sample after the conditioner, that difference should be 3. No? Make sure practically that when you catch the hot, humid sample of 80 degrees, first that you don't burn your hands, but secondly that you zip the bag and that the moisture will not condensate out of the bag. Because when you shake it and measure it in the lab, it needs to be still there. No? But it helps you to have an understanding, okay, am I using decent quality steam? Now, having all said that, then it's still in your own responsibility. How are you going to cope with this? The easiest way is just to adapt water. No, nothing else, because margins are thin. No additives, because it's only costly. It doesn't add value. Don't do it. Now, that's a way to go. You can talk a lot about this, whether it is sufficient. It's really depending on your usage of the feed. What shelf life do you require in the feed? How much extra moisture are you going to add in the feed? How fast will it be absorbed by the feed? And our opinion is there that you need to do it in a safe way, because you can build your brand name only once, but you can destroy it in 2 days. No, so you would like to avoid claims there, and that is what we say. Okay, reevaluate when you are utilizing only water, and try to combine it in a more safer way with a mold inhibitor or with a surfactant kind of product. Is that beneficial? Yeah, it's beneficial. I believe that we see examples that you can compensate the losses that you had, and then some feed millers tell me, yeah, but I already arranged that. Our nutritionist is adding the right moisture levels when we enter the composition in our system. You cannot every day compensate those moisture levels. It simply will not happen. So to compensate the losses that you initially occurred in your process is not a bad thing. You can debate if you are really increasing moisture levels to a certain extent whether it would add value. Yeah, there are pros and cons for that, but I leave that in the middle. But overall, I think moisture management is a critical thing to bear in mind, and it can really gain you money in the short term. either more capacity, better pellet quality, and in the end of the day, a nice return of investment. So that brings me basically to the last slide. Small recap. I think we discussed already a lot this morning about quality parameters. When things are getting unsure, that you be on top of things, that you measure, know what gets inside. We talked about moisture management. In the end of the day, I like to trigger you. It's not about the feed price. I think your farmers will evaluate you on the feed price times the FCR. So how much feed do I need to grow my chicken in a decent way? And the lower amount of feed that they substantially require to grow the animal, the better it is. And that is where you will be, that is where your evaluation and your focus should be. So yeah, thank you very much for this discussion, and now we're open to have your questions.
Thank you, Paul. And we're going into this matter, of course, with the other panelists. Ernst is sitting, and Pedro, welcome back at the table. I have some specific questions for you, Paul, just before we go into the final discussion here at the table. A few questions. Do they really know what is the incoming quality? What is your opinion? I mean, you have traveled around the world. You are a professional for already, and maybe Ernst as well. I mean, what is your vote for that? I mean, is 100% knowing what the incoming quality is?
Yeah, I think that's an easy answer. You never know. You know, it is really depending on where you get it from. When you get it from what you think is solid, from your previous suppliers that you verified, which are always delivering quality, then most likely it will be okay. When that purchase position is coming short and you rely on local suppliers, yeah, you don't know anything about their standards.
So it differs a lot. Is that also your experience there, Ernst?
Somehow in this direction, but first of all, it depends very much on the company's philosophy. Whether are they going to sample or not, what we discussed before.
Oh, yes.
And the other thing is, usually when you buy raw materials, you get a specification from your raw material. And this specification usually sent in advance before the raw material arrives on the plant. And then, the sample arrives before the truck arrives on the plant, so you're able to analyze the quality, whether it matches or not. If it's okay, then you unload it, and otherwise, you should have the gut to say, this is not for me, sorry.
No.
Bring it to somebody else, and this is not always the case.
Okay. Okay.
And of course, Pedro, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think we can preempt also when the grains, imagine corn, are still in the field. So there's some very critical times where we would know if those will be affecting or not the grain quality. So, for example, flowering stage, if there's a lot of drought, or we'll know that from that particular region, which that time you're given more than 3 months to understand, or at the grain filling stage, we would know already if there is going to be any compromising on the quality of grains moving forward when you buy them.
Yeah. As somebody asks, in addition to this, an old plant does not have sampling possibilities through the process. How important is it to invest in new good sampling systems during the process?
Yeah,
if you have to make the decision upon to establish a new plant and
I think it's important to analyze in different steps of the process what kind of quality that you are producing. No, so to have a sampling hatch at the end of the mixer, I think it's crucial to have to a similar. But maybe you better can explain where you believe that the most essential sampling points are, at least the minimum requirements.
The minimum requirements.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe this is the future of feed milling in general, that we are going to utilize more digitalization, more automation. That means quality analyzers, for instance, for particle size.
Yes.
After the hammer mill, that you have an equipment to measure the particle size right away. Once you get the answer in the finished product, 10, 20, 30, 40 tons have been produced with too large of particles. You know, so this is, I believe, this is the future.
The future is to be more in control and therefore having more all parts of the process
monitored and getting the answer in an early stage. This contributes also to lower energy consumption. Be more flexible, be more informed about what happens in the plant.
Yes, and reducing costs.
Yes,
and gaining better quality at the end, because of course everybody wants that. Speaking about corn, you mentioned about corn. To determine if corn is stored safe, could you say in how many of the cases that you've seen there is room for improvement?
Yeah, it basically comes with what Ernst already pointed out in mainly the hot and humid areas, where you have over 85%
of humidity.
You know, when you store corn for a certain time, it's the best way is to use aerated air, so that you if there is. Now, let's put it like this: when you have microbes, they have the ability to produce water, to produce heat, and that will deteriorate your stuff. So when you utilize air, then you blow out the heat. You make sure that there is no development of microbes, or at least you delay it. And that's the essence of aerating, aeration of air. But when the air available is very humid, over 85% humidity, then you only basically are going to put in moist. With all the consequences, because we learned what impact can be of moisture. Yeah.
A couple of specific questions. Let us dive in the Mentimeter, because a couple of people have. Let me start with the question. Good morning, Paul. What is the digitalizations that you are using for supporting the savings at feed mills?
The digitalization, that's a good point. I think it's, you know, what we try to work on in terms of moisture management, and that is more related to equipment, is inline measurements. Measurements. It depends also on the kind of feed mill. But, you know, when you know that you can produce a constant level of moisture, you could, you know, attach microwave sensors or even inline NIR equipment. It's expensive, but it will.
It's quite an investment if you have an old plant that doesn't have it.
But overall, I believe that you are more steadily, and you will find your earnings.
So it's an investment, actually.
It's an investment.
It's an investment.
I would call it moderate investment.
Moderate investment.
Yeah. It's not really low, and it's not really high.
Okay.
But it's an investment, definitely.
Okay. May you say something about correlation between PDI and pellet hardness?
Okay. Yes. PDI means durability, and durability means fine particles after sieving, after tumbling. So in general, and hardness means if you're going to squeeze the pellet until it breaks. Okay, these are the two units. And in general, we can say durability and hardness goes together. Durability improves and hardness becomes harder. So it goes basically together. And hardness might further increase, for instance, rabbit pellets in
just pointing out at
the one we're laying on the table here. While on the other hand, you can't get zero durability. There is always a certain number of ages which will break off, so you can get a good durability, but sooner or later it stagnates, because some corners will just break, even though the hardness still improves.
Okay.
This is maybe the difference. Yes. In general, it goes together, better hardness, better durability, but then durability stagnates sooner or later.
Paul?
I also like to point out that pellet durability is also a bit of an emotional thing. It's not always rational, because every commercial feed miller says, I need to have a PDI above 90, otherwise it's crap. And I think you should evaluate, so what is the quality of your pellets should be evaluated in what is the perceived quality of your end user, of your farmer.
What is the perceived quality of the end user?
So if your end user is seeing nice pellets in front of his animals, not falling apart is that if that's not supposed to happen,
yes, of course,
then he's not complaining, you know. But sometimes the ability to make 5 points more stronger pellet quality is not worthwhile the economical impact in the feed mill.
Then the investment is not worth it.
Yeah,
indeed. It also has to do with the application, right? And the transportation time that you would have those pellets and how we deliver it as well. So, indeed, it has to do in the end with what would that customer expect.
And you see, and that's funny for me to see when you compare integrators with commercial feed mills. Then integrators, they produce their own feed, and they have their own farms. So they say, for us the quality is good enough. But when you have the commercial feed millers who go to external farmers, then we need to have high pellet quality because otherwise they are complaining.
Because
It's the appearance.
It's a great smell right now because I touched the pellets right now, so I've got all the aromas.
This contains, I didn't mention it today, but usually I mention it on any presentation I do about pelleting. Produce pellets good as required, not good as possible.
Yeah.
So, good.
There's a
good
difference.
As required will be here, good as possible is here.
Yes.
And this gap is nobody is going to pay for.
No.
That will save you cost.
Yes.
That will save you cost.
That's a great tip. Thank you. A final question, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about mitigating processing losses, which actually we were all talking about. But this is a question, and it's the first question. It was raised after 1 minute of your presentation, and I'm just putting it in the middle. Is insect meal a popular raw material for feed production? Question mark. Further, what's the conversion rate of insect meal to replace fish meal, and when? In capitals.
Yeah, for me that's a tough question to answer. In the area of Africa, but not only in Africa, we do a lot of testing with black soldier fly, and it looks promising. But to tell you exactly, this is the amount of insect meal that you should replace with fish meal or whatever. I think it depends highly on the species as well. But that's not my cup of tea.
I believe there is a possibility and there is potential to utilize insect meal, but depends very much on their nutritive values, chemical properties. And for these things, I cannot answer. I'm not a nutritionist, but I see a potential.
Okay. So to elaborate furthermore, how are you currently mitigating processing losses? That's the question, actually, one of the final questions that I have for you. Their attendees and also here at the table, of course. Currently mitigating processing losses. Pedro, what are the threats, actually, if we look to processing losses?
Yeah, I think, based on the current scenario where we have energy prices going up. I mean, I think that's for me the one that strikes me the most. As we talked before, around 90% of the operation costs will be related to energy and raw materials. But energy is really high up there, and you mentioned that as well, Ernst. That a lot of it is to do with the later part of the process as well. So I think focusing on that areas where we can save some money. I think also Ricky mentioned several times focus on people in training, because a lot of times people would be the ones that can in the end reduce that bottom line, but on the end
make a difference.
Make a difference. Yes. And as Ernst mentioned, through all the process, I saw the numbers around even 30% of savings that can be made. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of optimizing the feed processing technology and use it as to reduce the energy costs.
We was talking also in the presentation, of course, of Paul about mycotoxin analysis, and I remember your presentation. This is actually the bare minimum, and a lot of have that. But actually, you should have. Do all feed mills have mycotoxin analysis?
Yeah, by now, I believe.
By now,
I believe.
Okay,
let's say.
Yeah, it depends a bit on the size of the mill. Yeah. That's not carved in stone, but when you have a feed mill of around 70,000 tons and above, 50,000 tons and above, they have. But they should have, at least. Yes. And I see that the ones below, they more or less rely on external validation of mycotoxins.
Okay.
It's a rapid determination.
Yeah. And they should have it, eh? It's really
it's vital. Important.
Yes, to add to that, I think sometimes we're trying to find standards or KPIs for quality, and I think you also will be of the same opinion. Mycotoxins will be one of those that we know a bit about the thresholds and the impact on animal health and performance. So having mycotoxin analysis is probably one of the simplest ways to understand if the raw material quality would be suitable, and also how would that translate into feed.
And gentlemen, what is the potential impact of anti-nutritional factors in the feed-to-food chain? Could we say something about that? I mean, how can this be avoided, actually?
Yeah, if I can start, I think,
please.
Indeed. So if you look at some of the mycotoxins, one example of the anti-nutritional factors that you mentioned, meaning some of them would be crossing into the food chain. So in 2012, we had an issue in Europe related to the aflatoxin and the transfer of aflatoxin into the milk. So we have to be really attentive to this year because, again, we have longer supply chains, storage will be a problem, and also we have drought situations in parts of Europe, but also around the world where grains are produced, and therefore this can be a concern. So I think it's here to be attentive, not only because of the scarcity, but because of the long chains that we have, long supply chains, and also the storage ability in some of the markets that are main producers of grain, specifically corn.
And if we speak about longer supply chains, as we actually mentioned in relation to grain, would localizing the supply points could play a role in gaining quality? Since we have the longer supply chains, could we then have a better food, let's say, feed quality, if you are localizing?
Yeah, I think you also rely on which kind of material. As Robert already indicated in early stage today, some materials you only can find in certain countries, and then you basically rely on those. But for most of the macros, I think that you can have a hold of them locally as well, but then quality parameters comes into place. For corn, for example, when you're utilizing very humid wet corn, let's say, you have a chance of getting molded.
Yes.
The other way around, when you're getting in very dried corn, then the ability to utilize moisture management goes down, because the ability of the kernel to absorb moisture will go down as well, because it has been thoroughly dried. That's not carved in stone what you should do, but I think it is all coming down to what we have said earlier. When you cannot anymore rely on your previous supplier due to whatever reason, make sure that you analyze, that you know what you're doing.
Mm. Finally, Ernst, I mean, you have spoken a lot about tips and tops about mitigating
some anti-nutritional factors you are able to treat by heat. For instance, looking at soya in the trypsin inhibitors, you need a heat treatment to destroy them. Mycotoxins, I support the answer from the two gentlemen's sampling in the field, and it's a rapid determination, can be done as a macro analysis. Yeah. So anyone is able to do it. You don't need to have a very educated person for it.
So maybe that's also good to point. If you have a decent heat treatment process, you can easily overcome molds. Then it's only about the recontamination that it possibly could trigger. When you talk about salmonella, you need to have a certain temperature requirement in your conditioner, depending on the kind of salmonella. But then easily you need to think in 1 minute retention at least in your condition. I think you can tell more about that. But when for whatever reason you cannot maintain that in your local feed mill, and you do have a salmonella issue or enterobacteria issue, then the only possible way to overcome it is by adding preservatives who also have the ability to reduce the enter or salmonella count.
All right. And like somebody says, so improve storage conditions to optimize production sequence, implement maintenance programs, all things that you actually elaborated on. So thank you so much for now. We're now going to the final part of the FeedTechnoVision event. Pedro, you will stay with me for a short while, and I would like to thank Paul and Ernst. Thank you so much for your presentation and for all the answers, generally and very specific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So, Pedro, let's start by asking the audience. I have one final question for you. The most important conclusion for you, take-home message, actually, if you want. So, what is the most important take-home message after that we have been virtually together this morning, afternoon, whenever you are on the globe? And I would like to know. So, I will open up again and finally the Mentimeter. Again with the QR code so that it is broadcasted. Slide into that because we're very interested in that specific answer. Of course, what is the take-home message? What's the most important conclusion for you, of course, because you are different in different responsibilities, I assume. And of course, the final question is according to that. Pedro, before we take a closer look in the answers that hopefully are given, briefly, how do you look back at the session?
No, fantastic session. I really appreciate the basically participation of all the people that are around the world and really actively participating with their questions, and of course all the speakers as well. I think they did a great contribution also to the discussion that we had in hand. So looking back to it, I think we had several discussions that are quite important, and I think we all agree in a few points that are going to be relevant. One point is that the macroeconomic factors are still going to fuel the market volatility. So this will continue. And as we also know, tomorrow, September 9th, the EU Ministers of Energy are going to...
very much attended, in Europe, of course, a very much attended European session. Not all have been. Why is that so important?
Yeah, indeed, it's because basically the EU ministers will be discussing how to reduce energy consumption and achieve the target of the 15%. And I think that probably can deploy also some areas that we will influence also. How we'll have raw material availability and how basically the geopolitical situation will be impacted for. So I think it's very critical for us, and we are in the right time to have these discussions, because already tomorrow we'll have some developments that may lead to some challenges there.
If I take a closer look to some of the answers that have been given, some say that it's flexibility. Flexibility is, of course, a must. Energy. Planning, quality, analyze and act upon results. Knowing. Pay attention to all variables and to be ready to change. And I think all are true. I don't know if they're all very easy to do, because if you have to be flexible, I mean, it's easy to say that you have to maintain a certain amount of flexibility, but on the other hand, that actually asks something from your plan, from your feed mill, from your staff, from everything. Other answers that are popping in is controlling quality at each level of process, and that with the local raw material. And another one says, though we are in a high impact situation, I do see possibilities to help adapt and overcome. Another person says, all starts with maintenance. In a changing business environment, it is important to improve systems and processes through adoption of more advanced feed milling technology and analytical capabilities. And still, please give us your answers. It's rising. What would you say, Pedro, is one of the most important thing? And then I might read a couple of others to conclude with.
No, absolutely. I think we are completely on the same line with the audience. Meaning we talked about being agile, the flexibility. Robert really clearly pointed to that point. We talked about quality assurance schemes adaptation. Of course, make sure that you check the regulatory demands and keep them.
Yes.
Geki also mentioned act now. So knowing that we potentially have a challenging situation ahead, meaning don't wait for it to happen, just be proactive, act now, as we were already on that sort of situation.
Yeah, actually, she said prepare for the worst.
Indeed. So I think that's key. Also, again, the stocking positions, meaning we talked a little bit about procurement towards the beginning of the session here. And are we prepared for that stocking position? Meaning it will take changes in the management, maybe some cost addition to be able to stock more material. In what conditions do you need to provide so that you would have preservation in order and maintain the nutrient value of these grains and feed in the end? So I think this is in the end the first conclusion from the FeedTechnoVision that I took and also corroborated by the audience. It's uncertainty and the volatility will continue. Therefore, we need to be proactive to act and prevent the issues to come in.
Yes, do you say in an energetic way? I will read out a couple of other reactions from our audience, Pedro. Even if these are hard times, there are still a lot of crucial things that can be done. That's a very hopeful message. There are many areas along the process that can be adapted to improve efficiency. Making sure that you're aware of your risks and put steps in place to mitigate these risks. In, I think, full concordation of our final session here at the table. And another one says that use technology to improve feed milling processes. I think also one of the last takeaways. So I remember one of the first reactions, where do you hope for? And somebody says hope. And then I remember that in the beginning, of course, it is difficult to say, well, here's your hope. But I think that there are a lot of things that can be done. You have stated that. I think all speakers have said that. If we look at the nearby future, I think there are a lot of things that we could do in the sector and in the chain. Pedro, final question to you. Looking back, I mean, I will always ask the same question if I have you in the beginning and at the end. Are you satisfied till now with what we have reached at the table?
No, absolutely. I think that was exactly the goals that we had in the beginning. So we stated and we wanted to understand if people could have a little more of a hold or to control parts of the procurement process and the quality control. So what kind of adaptations we need to do there. We wanted to also understand the opportunities to leverage operational excellence.
Yes.
And I think this is very, very well catered by both Ernst and Paul on the things that we can control, that we can actually do. And I think that's a message that's very strong. There are still some inefficiencies, if you call it, or opportunities to improve the process, and they can lead to reduction on energy costs, but also to help us deal with the current situation we have, which is highly uncertain and highly volatile.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And of course, thank all the other speakers, of course. We have Ernst, Paul, Geke, Robert, of course, here at the table. Thank you all for the speakers, of course, for both their presentations and all the answers. And of course, you. Thank you for attending this virtual FeedTechnoVision event 2022. Soon this recording will be available, and as soon as the presentations will be available, you'll be notified, of course, in the, I think the next day, so as in the day of tomorrow, the recording will be already ready, and as soon as the presentations are available, we will be notify you on the same interface as you're now. And on behalf of Selco, I would like to thank you for joining. Keep up the good work. Good luck. My name is Donatello Piras. I wish you a great day ahead whenever you are, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.